You're now listening to 105.2 Sotec FM, where we play nothing but Skaven Sacrifice, and more Skaven Sacrifice. This ain't your warm blood radio station. It's time to look at the new Renegades rules for Lizardmen. I think it's only fair, given the disclaimer I gave at the start of the video. This one's going to be a lot shorter, so you won't need to skip through it. Obviously, I wasn't a big fan of the Demons book, but I do really like the approach that Val has gone with on the Lizardmen book. So it's only fair to say, you know, when I was not behind the Demons book, this one I am much more in favour of. Obviously, there are some things that I think need tweaking, but I think generally the approach is good, and then it's more sort of specifics on things that need to be tweaked. I've watched or skimmed through a good chunk of the video where they talked about the changes. I may have missed some bits and pieces here and there, but I think I get the general vibes. Obviously, this is a little bit more of a rough draft than some of the other ones, just in terms of timescale, trying to get things out before the FAQ, which is hopefully coming next week or the week after. And also less of a focus on points, which is super fair. So I am going to talk about points, but it's not necessarily like a major focus of the video. There are just some things that I think are significantly out of whack, which is not necessarily criticism of, you know, this draft. It's more, you look at the cost of the Cold One riders, and you look at the points in the legacy, and you're like, man, this is just not worthwhile. So there'll be some talk about points, but it's not a major part of it. Just a very quick note here. I have tried to avoid reading other people's thoughts on the document and, you know, watching stuff outside of Val talking about it on the basis of I don't want it to influence my opinions. I'd like to come to my own conclusions and then give them here. So that means that if I've missed any sort of like niche interactions, apologies, please do point them out in the comments, but I think I've got a pretty good handle on this. This is, I think, so like, it's reasonably far removed from the rules that we see in the legacy PDF, which is just kind of the most dull thing you can that you can imagine. It's a continuation of the like 1.5 draft, which I think did a good job of furthering the flavour of the Lizardmen in a way that feels like, you know, it's pulled from previous editions. So, yeah, it feels like I think I've got a pretty good handle on it. But, yeah, if there's any niche interactions that you think are fun or that you think I've missed, please do put them down in the comments, and we can talk about them there. One major disagreement I have with how things are being set up, and my one major concern, is basically all to do with the magic that is in this document. We're now, 2.5 years into the old world. My memory of previous editions is pretty far removed, and I also didn't play 8th edition, which I think, from what I've, you know, talking to people, seems to be the caster heaviest edition. In my mind, magic is not as domineering in this edition as it is in others, even though we are in the middle of what can really only be described as a spellcaster meta, and hopefully that's going to change in a couple of weeks. But I think this draft should not push Lizardmen to an army where they are up there with, for example, Beastmen in terms of being an issue in terms of spellcasting. This led me to think about what I wanted out of spellcasting, and I had a look at some other, you know, previous edition rules from like 8th edition for what Lizardmen had. For example, the Engine of the Gods. I'm sure we'll talk about more when we get there. But I think what I want from Lizardmen casting is they want to be good, obviously. A slan should be good, and you're paying a lot of points. You can spend 500 points pretty comfortably on a slan, and it's, you know, if you're spending 500 points on a dragon, it needs to make its money worth. Same for a slan. So I think it has to be good. I think there is a point where things become too good, and credit to Pip, who I talked to a couple of weeks ago about just the magic system in general when we were out for dinner at the Saffron Slam. And he was pointing out how by halving the value of the pluses, you know, now level 3s only cast at +2, level 4s cast at +2 instead of the +3 and +4 before, the casting system is a lot less granular. So with that in mind, it's much harder to give buffs to, you know, casting without making it kind of spiral out of control. And I think that can be seen really clearly with Beastmen, Beastmen have +3 on their level 1s, just inherently. If they're playing Wild Herd, they've got +1 to cast from the Wild Herd bonus. They've got +1 to cast from the Herdstone. There are some downsides in there, but a lot of the time you can mitigate them with good positioning, and so on and so forth. So I don't want them to be at the point where you're getting too many bonuses to cast, and that makes them oppressive. That's a little bit limited by the fact that you can still only have one Slann in an army, so it's less of a concern. But I think it's made me think about how I want casting to be addressed. I think casting is going to be looked at in the FAQ. I would be incredibly surprised if spellcasting, the good armies that cast spells, aren't adjusted in some way. Maybe the entire system of Magic gets adjusted the way that it was a year ago, when it was changed from everyone's casting at +4 from the level 4 wizards, and now they're only casting at +2 for the level 4 wizards. So maybe there's going to be some sort of systemic change in there as well. I don't know. And, if there's big changes, obviously there can be tweaks to this document beforehand. But what I think I want to avoid, and I listened to a bit of the discussion they had about casting being good. It was mentioned that there's lots of magic resist in the game right now. And that's my perception of why there's so much magic resist, is because the game is unplayable competitively if you just allow the spellcasting armies to run wild, which means that there is a tax on every list to bring magic resist on the things that matter. That doesn't then mean we should give casting armies the tool to go above magic resist. Also, hopefully we're going to see casting brought more in heal in 2 weeks' time, so you shouldn't need the ability to get over that line. So I'd like to see not necessarily like massive power boosts to casting, but I'd like to see consistency boosts to casting. I think, in my mind, what would make sense is to make it so that you're more likely to cast your spells, as opposed to making it so that you're casting at some sort of unbeatable level, making it so that, I need to get through the -2 magic resist my opponents, I've got to bring +4, +5 to cast, or, whatever theoretical maximum you could go with items and all that sundry. So I'll talk about it a little bit more when we get to the Engine of the Gods as well. But one of the things when I looked at previous editions of the Lizardmen rules, when I was sort of doing my research, getting my thoughts in line for what I wanted to talk about here, the Engine of the Gods used to reduce the casting values of the spells that you were targeting, and that just seems like such an interesting spot to inhabit. Right now, I think casting values are probably too high for most armies across the board, just in terms of, or most spell laws just across the board. And the Engine of the Gods used to pick one spell law and reduce the casting value of all of the spells in there by 1 for the turn. I didn't actually look too closely at the mechanics of it, but that was the buff that it gave. It made it easier to cast spells without necessarily making it harder for your opponent to dispel. Not skewing the game in a way where your opponent felt like they had no interaction, but make it so that your army did the thing it meant to do more often and felt more consistent. And I think that's a really nice change. So the Engine of the Gods change, moving away from giving an additional +1 to cast, because there's an additional +1 to cast that's now been baked into the rules that the Slann can take. I think fair enough taking that away. But instead of just giving bound spells the plus to cast, I think maybe we just look at doing something like reducing the target value of the spells, or maybe reducing the target value of the bound spells, depending on how you want to balance it. There was also talk about, obviously Val has sort of lifted rules in away from the Cascade of Souls. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I like some of the versions that he's gone with in that, in terms of there's the 6-inch, no sorry, there's a 12-inch bubble of a 6-up ward save, the remains in play spell, kind of like it is for the casket, but the casket is an 18-inch bubble, and it also gives you -1 to hit. Not giving the -1 to hit, I think, is very good, given how much better the Death Star you can build defensively is for Lizardmen, and also making it a smaller bubble, because your defensive unit is going to be moving up the table with. So I really like those aspects that he's taken and put into the bubble for the casket that's on the back of the Stegodon. But then there's things, I don't think it should necessarily give +1 to bound spells. Obviously, that's just something that's been lifted from the the casket itself. But if you look at the amount of bound spells that Tomb Kings have, and I'm not talking scrolls because I don't believe it interacts with them in any way, I'd have to double check, but as far as I can tell, the only bound spell you get is Light of Death, Light of Protection, and it specifically says on the tooltip for the Casket of Souls that it doesn't apply to the casket spells. Other than that, it's just a Ruby Ring of Ruin. So I think there's a real difference in terms of what you can do with Tomb Kings, what you can do with Lizardmen in terms of bound spells. So I think just giving them a flat +1 to cast isn't the way to go. But I'd also make the spells easier to cast. When I was thinking about what do I want out of a magic missile in terms of how good do I think it should be? In terms of bound spells, I don't think you should ever really go over +2. I think +2 is like the top end. Now that I've played with +1 for Ruby Ring of Ruin, that just feels crap, honestly. I don't even feel like that should be nerfed to only a +1 to cast. I understand that it was omnipresent and also the casting system was changed. I think Ruby Ring of Ruin could go back to +2 to cast. Maybe it gets more expensive, or maybe it's limited in some other ways. I don't know. But that aside, I think capping your ability to cast for a magic missile, a bound spell, just in general, at +2, I think makes a lot of sense. But then you pair it with a lower casting value, and I think I want it to go off on something like a 6 on the dice. I feel like if you roll a 6 on the dice, you're getting that off, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, like 62% of the time, 65% of the time, something like that. So you're getting it off roughly, a bit under 2/3 of the time. You're relatively consistent, and you're getting a good effect from it. But then your opponents still have a chance to dispel it. Remember that dispels are, you have to beat the number that your opponent has rolled. So if they have +3 to dispel, you're effectively having to roll 2 higher than them on the... Sorry. If they have +3 to cast on their bound spell and you only have +2 to dispel, you effectively have to roll 2 numbers higher on the dice. So if they're rolling a 7, you need to roll a 9. And in terms of how likely that is to dispel things, it becomes vanishingly unlikely the higher up that you get. So anyway, short version is, I don't think this edition of the game we should be looking for massive push power in spells. I think the game is going to be fixed in regards to casting, or at least tweaked in regards to casting, so that the oppressive armies are less oppressive in that regards, and I want to make sure that Lizardman doesn't then just become like the dominant caster army in an unfun way. But I think having stuff like Engine of the Gods make your spell casting more consistent, even if it's not necessarily pushing the casting value up, is a clean way to do things. And it's also, as Val has done, I think, quite well with this document, it's got precedent, right? A lot of the stuff he's taken has been from previous editions, especially 8th edition, from when I've been looking at stuff, and this is me just going, hey, that 8th edition rule on the Engine of the Gods is actually pretty good, so maybe that's something to tweak in. But yeah, that's my main concerns about the draft are to do with the power of the spellcasting, but I like the flavour. Let's get to it. Let's start off with the army composition list. This is not massively changed. There is a restriction here that isn't highlighted. It used to be that Skinks and the Saurus Oldblood, I think it was Priests and Oldblood, were limited together, but that has been changed, tweaked around with in the Legacy, the Renegades 1.5. So you might have seen more of them on the table anyway. Here, it's just things are limited in a way that makes way more sense. You've got 0-1 Slan per 1,000 points, or 0-1 Saurus Oldblood per 1,000 points. Just makes sense here. This sounds like you can have 2 Slan. You could, but they're both level 4 casters, so if you're playing the match play rules, you can actually only take 1. So if you're playing without using the match play guide rules, where you've got the limitations of only 1 level 4 wizard up to 2 level 3 wizards, yada yada, you wouldn't be able to run a second Slan, and the thought of a level 3 Slan is... That's a thought crime that should be stamped out immediately. Don't think about it. Being able to run, 1 Slan or double Saurus Oldblood makes sense. This is just in line with what you'd expect to see. And uncapped veterans, Skink Chiefs, and Priests is very nice. Just being able to run, assuming match play guide rules, 3 of each, you're going to run out of points well before you get there. That's something else, actually. Just in terms of like the overview. And this is, again, not a criticism of the document. This is a criticism of Lizardman. Everything is just a little bit too much. When I've been looking at sort of lists and how to build around with this faction, it feels like building Chaos Dwarves. Chaos Dwarves can have really fun, flavorful armies where you can kind of build a really solid core and you can do stuff around it. But you kind of struggle to do that at 2,000 points. You just don't have enough points at 2,000 points to kind of get everything in that you want to make things work. Lizardmen feel the same way. I think they are just too pricey across the board. Again, obviously Val talked about not being too focused on points with the FAQ coming. Super fair. But I think like, and something to note is this book could do with just a drop in points kind of across the board. And there have been some good drops, and there are some things as well that I'll highlight that I think need to be a bit cheaper. Other than that, we have lost the restriction on having to run a unit of Saurus Warriors, which is good. Obviously, that was changed in the first Renegades draft here, but just getting rid of the having to run a unit in core is generally a good thing. Skink cohorts have been added. There is some degenerate stuff you can do with this. And unfortunately, when I saw them, I was like, oh, here's like, well, when I initially looked at them, I was like, okay, here's how I can break them in one or two ways. And then also, Gaunt Herter came into the stream on Friday for Fix My List and had put a list in with just a spam list of skinks. So I think it was 7 units of skinks, 4 of the skirmishers and 3 of the cohort, just as like an MSU, very similar to almost like Bretonnian Exiles, where you're like, let's just take as much cheap mobile shooting as possible. It's like the fix for, I don't have anything that I really want to spend my core points on, so I'm just going to go for MSU scoring and evasion. I'd like to avoid that. I don't think it's like a competitively imbalanced problem. It's just kind of dull. And they're dull enough to see on the tabletop. You know, even Cathay, now that they've got the peasants, people have moved towards, like, let's run multiple units of the peasants and then 1 brick of warriors, because they don't have the ability to run 8 units of peasants. So I'd like to see that limited in some way, but that's more of just like a meta issue as opposed to an issue with the document. Maybe the way they need to work is to actively have to put the Croxagore in. That could be something that would limit them. I think, yeah, I'm not 100% sure what the purpose of them is in terms of like their place in the book. Just I feel like they compete with a couple of other units, but I think there is some fun stuff you can do. If you want to run skink cohorts the way that they are intended to be run, which is skinks and Croxagore in a ranked up unit, then I think you can do that, and there's some fun things you can do there, but I don't think it fits into a good list, which is, again, not necessarily an issue with the document. It's more an issue of the meta. But we'll talk about that more when we get to them. I'm just jazzed to see, you know, Skinks plus Croxagore come back. It's something I'd completely forgotten existed, but thematically is incredibly cool, and I'm very pleased to have. 0-1 unit of Temple Guard if your general is a Slan. Sweet. Love it. And then you've got all of the other stuff in core that you've had previously. Special is all of the stuff that you'd had previously. Temple Guard, given that you can't... Yes, I think in the Legacy document, you can only take 1 unit of Temple Guard or something like that. I can't remember the exact restriction, but just making sure it's on there. Again, this is in line with Renegades, 1.5, and then the Stegodon being there in Special is nice as well. But just uncapping stuff here is good. The only real difference is if you're playing the Match Play Guide restrictions, you would have been able to run 4 Bastillodons at 2,000 points. So technically, this is kind of a nerf, because you were never going to be able to fit more than that in with, you know, just in a 2,000 point list. But I think this is a healthier way to have it. What I don't want is for this sort of document to be like, hey, the best way to play is to spam 1 unit 25 times. Now that, you know, if, for example, if Saurus Warriors were, or no, let's say Skink Skirmishers, let's say that this restriction was given that you had to have 1+ unit of Skink Skirmishers, and because there's a restriction there, the Match Play Guide says, actually, because it's a restriction, that overwrites the other restriction, and you can just run as many units as you want. That would suck. So, yeah, I think this is technically a slight nerf, but just good for the faction in general. Rare, Stegodons instead of both sets of Stegodons in rare. Then you've got Salamanders, Razordons, and Troglodons, and just removing the restrictions here. Yeah, you can only take, assuming Match Play Guide rules, you can only take 2 of any unit in rare anyway, so this 0-1 kind of is irrelevant. Realistically, it doesn't make much difference. And yeah, then Mercenaries, Allies, don't care about either of those, but again, if you do, it's nice to have them in. I guess this is in previous editions, maybe they could ally with other stuff, but it's never really been a focus of mine in terms of how that would work. BSB, exactly the same as before, but you can have a Slan, you can have a Scar Veteran, and a Skink Chief can all be a BSB. And there is now reason for all three of those to be your Battle Standard Bearer, which I think is very cool. I think there is fun stuff you can do for all of them, and I really like that. Whereas previously, it was probably a Slan, it was maybe a Scar Veteran if you were doing some sort of like Warbanner BSB on a Carnosaur just to add a little bit of combat res, which I think was a compelling build. But now there is actual reason for a Skink Chief to be the Battle Standard Bearer. Moving on to the special rules. There are some things in here that I think would be tweaked. Arcane Vassal. I think 24 inches is too far. However, I'm aware that when I read these things, I immediately go to like, what's the most extreme version? And, you know, because I'm looking at this as a perspective of, does this fall within the guidelines of what I'd expect to see? Is this going to be not broken? So I worry when I see 24 inches. I'm like, you can probably do some degenerate stuff with that. However, this is how it was in 8th edition, because I went and looked. And also making it clear that the range to dispel is measured from this model, just to make it like the fixed Dark Elf, focus familiars. I think Arcane Vassal is a very good rule. I think 24 inches is too far. You can do some, like the immediate thing that I thought of is you're able to march or like fly march a Skink Priest up the board, theoretically suicide it. Actually, there's ways to protect it, which we'll get to later on with the spells. But you can put it up the board in a way that is, you're able to then get angles you wouldn't be able to get, and being able to wind blast people into bizarre circumstances off the board. Yes, obviously, you should just not be within 2 inches of the board if your opponent has Wind Blast, but I just worry that this is too much flexibility. Arcane Vassal is already very, very good in that you are able to gain 360-degree line of sight, or a different 90-degree line of sight, depending on whether you're targeting like a skirmishing Skink Priest, or if you're charging something in a unit, or the Troglodon. So I think it's probably already good enough without making it also incredibly long. I'm not going to say that this is broken, but I just think it's maybe too forgiving in terms of what it gives, and I'd like to see it dropped. I think it used to be 12 inches. I could see it going a little bit further, but I think 24 is a little bit of an overshoot. Aquatic. This rule has been changed to give it a lot of power, and you know what? Love it. Big fan. Aquatic did basically fuck all previously, so I'm actually quite keen to see this change. So this is probably the most powerful version you could write, I think, in terms of previously Aquatic worked basically as you've got move through cover, but only for water features. In fact, it might have been more limiting than move through cover. I'd have to double check. But the way it works now is they treat anything that's a water feature as open ground. So you don't take dangerous terrain, you don't lose an inch of movement, and you don't take the lowest of the d6s when you're charging. So this is a very strong buff in terms of if your tables have water features. They're not usually going to have water features, but, you know, it's cool that it makes sense. Skinks can move fast through water. Cool. Love it. Oh, also skinks gain this rule. In addition, as long as at least 50% of the models in the unit are within a water feature, they benefit from partial cover. Love it. Great. That makes sense. You know, skinks going below the surface of the water and being harder to hit. Again, you're not going to see a lot of water features apart from the ones that you're going to cast, but I think that spell needs to be changed, so we'll get to that. I think this rule feels pretty solid, especially because most tables won't have it. But yeah, I like it. I think this is fun. I don't think it's overpowered as far as I can tell. It's got the same wording as the forest wording has now. Yeah, cool, great stuff. If you're worried about this in terms of, again, I'm going to talk more about Monsoon, but if you're worried about the fact that putting half the unit in the Monsoon gives cover, a Monsoon obscures vision, right? So you could just be behind it and you'd be partially obscured anyway. So that's not really a concern for me in terms of how that interaction works. Anyway, Aquatic, good change, like it. Beast Handlers. I'm not going to focus too much on the wording, but I think the general vibe here makes sense. Basically, makes them count as cannon crew. I think it needs to be clarified a little bit more. I'm not going to go specific on the wording. Val's going to get loads of feedback, I'm sure, so someone's going to point out all of the specifics, but I think the way that it needs to work is that they aren't counted as models in terms of like measuring distance as well. I think there needs to be a rider on there. Again, just to clarify that everything comes from the beasts, basically. But yeah, this does make the beasts, which is the Razordon and the Salamander. There we go. Words are hard. It does make them significantly tankier, because previously the way that worked was when the unit was hit, you'd randomize, and on 1 through 4 you'd hit the Salamander or the Razordon. On a 5 or a 6 you'd hit the Handler. Now you take the wound on the higher toughness, you take it on the better save of the Warbeast, and then after the wound has been lost on a 5+, that wound is passed over to the Handler. So you could just soak wounds there. So definitely stronger, but I think they were so naff that this is not necessarily a problem in terms of it adding strength as well as clarifying things. So cool. That's fine. Again, I think it needs clarifying, but someone else can give that feedback. That's not important for this this review. Predatory Fighter. This set off alarm bells. My first take on this was I was getting 40k, NAM style flashbacks. And then I read it again, and I was like, actually, no, it's probably fine. There are some interactions in here that I think are maybe a little concerning, just in terms of if you can get full hit rerolls, basically, then maybe, like, full hit rerolls, and you get the buff from the Troglodon so that you're exploding on 5s instead, maybe too good. But the way that it works, and again, this is a rule that is lifted from, I think this was 8th edition as well. It's definitely in one of the previous 3 editions. I forget. Anytime something made me raise my eyebrows, I went back and had a look and be like, oh, yep, nope, that's where he's lifted it from. Cool. All right, then that's... I haven't heard complaints about it from a previous edition. Also, if rules have been lifted from a previous edition and they were a problem at the time, please let me know, because I either have forgotten or don't have the context. I was a very vibes-based Warhammer Fantasy player back in my teens, so the actual... I didn't play for a long time. Even before the end times, I'd stopped playing fantasy. So my memory of previous editions is pretty far from how the game is now. So if this is something that made Lizardmen super disgustingly overpowered, which I'm sure it didn't, please do let me know down below. But I think this looks fine. I've played with various different versions of what you might call critical 6s, where 6s to hit auto wound, like old poison, 6s to hit generate an additional hit. That's something that you'd saw a lot in 40k. And then also, this is the worst one. I've never seen this before, but a 6 to hit generates a new roll to hit. So I guess the worst version is like the Bone Giant, which has each unsaved wound generates another attack. But this one is just if you roll a 6 to hit, so you've got a 1 in 6 chance, you've got an additional hit there. And again, there's stuff that buffs it down the line, which makes it better. But generally, this just gives you a little bit more oomph. Most of the things this is on, I think, are either bad or it makes sense. So, in terms of, like, Saurus, for example, Saurus going from 2 attacks with Furious Charge and then losing Furious Charge and gaining this, which is probably fine, because when were Saurus realistically going to be charging? Instead, getting, 1/6, 2.3 attacks instead of 2 attacks. Yeah, that seems entirely fine. It's kind of in line with a lot of factions having some sort of, like, Orcs have reroll 1s to wound and an additional pip of AP on the charge. That's a really, really strong rule, and they've got units that can benefit from it. Like, you've got the characters on Wyverns, you've got the Boar boys that are able to get the charges and do stuff there. Whereas this is just sort of middling strength, but consistent buff. So, yeah, I think if this was 40k, I'd be a little bit annoyed, mostly because it's going to slow the game down in terms of the amount of a dice you have to roll. But given that it's old world and you kind of roll smaller pools of dice anyway, and a lot of the time that you spend playing the game is not rolling additional dice, it's more about the movement and the measuring and stuff like that and the thinking. I don't think there's any real problems with this. I think this is cool. I'm interested to see how much it makes a difference. At some point, there is a tipping point where infantry units are like just so decent for their points value that you're like, this is kind of fine. So I'll be curious to see that's made it. I feel like for Temple Guard, this is more likely to push them over that line, although they're already decent with support. But I think Saurus Warriors might still just live in the void, unfortunately. Cleaving Blow still exists, still an army special rule for no good reason. The universal special rule that never was. Cold-Blooded, this is... when I first read this, I was like, huh, they've nerfed Cold-Blooded. No, this is just the version from the 1.5 draft, which is basically anytime you roll against your leadership test. Anytime you roll against your leadership stat, you get to use your Cold-Blooded. I don't think there's anything that supersedes this. I think this is very specifically... literally everything, because it's all leadership tests, which include these, and then break tests, which is the only thing that uses your leadership that isn't a leadership test. Anyway, so that's all fine. Drop Rocks. This is the rule that you have on the pterodons specifically. It's like the dwarf copters. They have a drop rule as well. It's like the Cathay balloons, only not busted. So there are a few cases of this across the board, and this has gone from D3 strength 4 hits to D3 strength D3 strength 4 hits to D3 strength 4 AP 1 hits for each model that has moved over. Pterodons are pretty pricey, and they kind of don't or didn't offer a huge amount. So this was something that I've seen Lizardmen players play around with and not ever been super impressed by. But I think it's good enough that it adds a little bit of juice, so it helps you go in. Here's the thing, the AP1 is nice and will help sometimes, but I feel like a lot of the targets you're going to go for, which is you're going to try and snipe out characters that are outside of units. What sort of characters are outside of units? Well, it's probably like, maybe it's engineers who might have light armor, or maybe heavy armor if it's a dwarf, but probably, relatively lowly armored. Or it's wizards who don't wear armor. So in that case, it doesn't make a difference. Or skirmishers, who have not immunity to shooting, but they're harder to kill with ballistic skill shooting because of the skirmish, -1 to hit penalty, or the ability to loop around terrain and get additional minuses to hit. Skirmishers often are completely unarmored. So this feels like just a raw buff, but I think it's actually not that big. It opens up the pool of things that you're able to go into, and it will increase your damage into a good number of targets. But I feel like the optimal targets you were going to be putting this on, it's going to have a small to negligible effect on. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe now the game plan is to take 36 of them, or however many you can fit, and you just fly over the opponent and like, I've mathematically wiped your Death Star. But I think that's not the case. I'd have to do the maths on it. It does get around things like the banner of the swirling winds, the -1 to hit for ballistic skill shooting. New meta, Lizardmen, just overpowered. And then Obsidian Blades is just the same. That's a good point. So I was talking about Predatory Fighter being a rule like choppers, but then they also have Obsidian Blades on their AP 1-hand weapons. I don't think it's a problem. All of the things, like, I don't think at any point this edition have I gone, man, that unit's hand weapon attacks are so oppressive, and I'm pretty sure that Predatory Fighters combined with Obsidian Blades is not going to get me there. So we'll move on. Skink Riders, this is a good rule. It's clarifying basically just that you always use the highest weapon skill of the unit when determining what your opponent hits you from, which is good, because skinks have terrible weapon skill, and that means that there was a lot of stuff in the book previously that looked very squishy, just in terms of like toughness and saves and stuff like that, but then was even more squishy because you're like, oh man, I'm being hit on 2s. That sucks. I'm being hit on 2s by Chaos Warriors as opposed to anything that's like really, really punchy. On to magic items. We're going to start off with magic weapons. These are highlighted as maybe there needs to be some changes. I'd be super happy to see some changes. I think all of these are incredibly underwhelming. I'm not really going to talk about them much, but it's also kind of just across the board that magic weapons are underwhelming. So, I'm not super bothered about that. If I think about a Lord that is going to be some sort of killy character, I probably just want to give them a great weapon. So, yeah, like, as long as that's possible. Skink Chieftains, I don't think can have great weapons. I've literally just thought of that now, so I guess there is slightly more reason to go with, you can have a Cav Spear for 4 points for a Cav Spear is, frankly, criminal. criminal. But I guess a magic weapon is slightly more important for this faction if you want to do something interesting with a skink chief. But yeah, I'm not particularly worried about that. All of the builds for skink chief that I've seen or thought about have not included them being the ones to do the damage, so that seems kind of fine. And also, I wouldn't take any of these. I'd probably just take like a sword of might or a biting blade, or you could even go for a meteor hammer if you really want to, but I personally think spending a lot of points on a magic weapon on something that is kind of naff in combat anyway is a little bit of a waste, and by a little bit I mean a lot. So anyway, be cool to see some changes here, but yeah, otherwise whatever. Blade of Revered Tatsiki. This is one that I see people put in their list sometimes, and I always advise against, but I think it's okay. Like, it's priced at Old Ogre Blade. It's obviously worse than Old Ogre Blade, but one of the nice things is you have a lot of attacks with Saurus characters, and every wound you do counts for combat res. They can still make regen saves, but if you look at combats as not just, I'm going to kill you by wiping you out, and you look at them as, who's winning, like, how much do I win by in terms of overall output, which includes static combat res. Like, it's got some scope there, it's got some value, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not a lover of this. I'd kind of just rather have a great weapon and like a good save, or like a double good save, because they don't have regen, so there's no triple save here for the beleaguered lizardmen, unfortunately. But anyway, magic weapons haven't been changed. Maybe they should be, but who cares? Magic armor. This one is cool. I think this one gets highlighted. This one has like maybe this needs to be tweaked. And this works in a very similar way to the, it's not the glowy green amulet, it's the glittering whatnots for orcs and goblins, but it's different. So, it's a shield, so you can't take it on the slan, which means it's an arcane defense item that can't go on your wizard, which is good and bad, because a lot of these items, or I say a lot of these items, the orcs and goblin one is an arcane item, which is limiting in its own way. So it's a shield that gives you protection from specifically magic missiles. When a magic missile hits the bearer or unit that they're with, you can roll a d6, and on a 4+, it bounces it back. And if you bounce it back, the caster that cast it and their unit are able to try and dispel it. This is interesting. This is different to the glittering whatnots, in that the glittering whatnots is instead of a dispel attempt. So you get to roll a dispel, and then you get to try and bounce it back, which means you're really doubly protected, which I'm not sure is like necessarily a huge issue, apart from the fact that it enables Death Stars pretty well. So you can go for your Temple Guard Death Star, which is already very defensive. You can give it a Spell Eater Axe, or Magic Resist 2 somewhere. Then you have the wizard in there that's going to try and dispel, and also there are ways to buff up your dispelling ability, and then on top of that you've got this. I feel like it might be too many layers of protection, specifically because I think the Death Star is probably the way that most people are going to go with the list building here. So I like the way that it works in terms of bouncing the magic missile back, but I think I would retool it so it's instead of dispelling, but maybe you make it on a 3+. Maybe you're just like, hey, I'm not going to try and dispel. You get a Valtide me, but 2/3 of the time I get a Valtide you instead. Maybe that's the difference. I'd go there. I just worry a little bit that having too many layers of protection there is probably too good. And, with the version I'm talking about, where I'm like, hey, on a 3+, you get to bounce the spell back, they're probably still not going to magic missile you at all. So maybe it's like I'm making something out of nothing, but I just think there shouldn't be 3 levels of protection against spells, specifically on Death Stars. So, yeah. Good on Ripidactyls as well, which is interesting, and we'll get to. We can talk about that one more later on down the line. Other than that, same here for Hide the Cold Ones. I still am sad when I see Stupidity, but sure. And also the +1 to your armor value feels a lot less useful now, I think. We'll talk about that when we get to the Saurus characters. Talisman's Glyph Necklace continues to be just incredible. Aura of Quetzal is interesting. And I wonder, I thought about this in terms of maybe there's an oppressive build here with the Magic Banner, the Sun Standard of Chotek, but I actually don't think there is. In fact, let's talk about the Sun Standard, and then I'll come back and talk about why I think there isn't an oppressive build here. So, Sun Standard. It previously was turning off stand and shoot, and what else did it do? I'm going to have to pull up the document here because it has been a hot minute. In fact, magic items are down towards the bottom. Sun Standard. Okay, so it's -1 to be shot and also no stand and shoot against this unit. That's fine, and that was 40 points. And honestly, that's probably priced kind of appropriately. This is also just now -1 to hit overall. This is basically glittering robes that also turns off stand and shoot, but then stacks with glittering robes. That worries me a little bit. I think it's probably okay. So when I looked at this, I was like, you can do too much. You can go -1 to hit with illusion on a unit of Temple Guard, and then their weapon skill 4 already, so a lot of things are going to be hitting them on. Let's say you're going in a Dragon Lord, just as like a realistic thing that might try and fight. You know, you send a couple of dragons in, or you send a dragon and some supporting cavalry or whatever. You try and go in and get these Temple Guards. You're going to be hitting them on 5s, which is pretty punishing. And also you can double stack this with the anti-stomp banner. So you can you can stack it with earthen ramparts in terms of turning off stomps and lowering number of attacks. So I wonder if -1 to hit on a banner is too good, but it is pricey. So yeah, I'm not sure. This is, in my mind, this is a yellow. I think it needs to be looked at. What happened with the Ogre one was they had a banner that started off with having -1 to hit, and then that got changed back to what it was previously. So maybe this ends up being the same, but I don't know. I'm cautious about being able to stack too many -1s to hit in general, because then you're in a world where how do you interact with that? If the Monster Hunter Tapestry didn't exist, I think it would be a slightly different consideration, because the Monster Hunter Tapestry stomp attacks would get around that -1 to hit issue. Like when people have built these incredible characters that are super hard to deal with in terms of like, I'm going to build a Doom Bull that's got slug skin and also the bedazzling helm, and has the Talisman of Protection, has a shield, and a great weapon if I want to use it, and I've got like a 2-up save in combat, and I'm -2 to hit, and I've got a 5-up ward save, and I can go toe-to-toe with a dragon. It's like, yeah, you can, because the dragon will be hitting you maybe even on 6s, depending on the weapon skill there. So that's one of the differences here. The base unit is going to be weapon skill 4 or even lower, depending on the unit that it's in. But then, previously, you would just get stomped. And that's why those builds were like, kind of, they're fine. They're okay. You can tank a dragon for a bit, but they will still step on you. Now that you can also stack it with the -2 to hit and turning off stomps, I wonder if it's just too scary to have on a Death Star. I want infantry to be good without everyone building Death Stars. And I have a lot of empathy for Games Workshop here. I don't know how you get there. Because stuff like this looks really cool. I'm like, oh man, I'd love to have a unit that's -1 to hit. And I'm like, what if I just did... what if I put all of my eggs into the one basket? Yes, of course. That's a fun thing to play against, which is the experience of the Wild Herd list. I don't know if the unit can do enough for that to be valuable, honestly. So, it might not be a problem competitively, but it might just be Lizardmen become too uninteractive, because you're like, how do I get through something that has -2 to hit and anti-stomps? Being able to be -1 to hit in the shooting phase and in combat, all on one item, feels pretty good as well. Obviously, you can... There's an equivalence, right? You can do it with Beastmen. You just take both of the items, and you put them on both of the Chaos Gifts, and you put them on different models, so you can still do it, but you're not going to be able to remove this, because it's going to be on the standard in the unit most of the time. If you're putting it in Temple Guard, it's going to be on the Temple Guard character, which makes it kind of like it's a bit much. Maybe the solution for this is you make it more expensive, so it's more of a punishment, because right now, to get -1 to be shot and also -1 to be hit in combat, I think the cheapest way you can do it would be, I guess it's 85 points for Beastmen, like for that combination in terms of having it in items. There maybe is something else, like are there any armies that can do that elsewhere? Skaven can have -1 to be shot. I don't think there's any other armies that can do both that is cheaper, just off the top of my head. No, it's not coming to mind. But yeah, being able to stack too much there and then also have a wizard that can very consistently cast Glittering Robes is maybe too good. But again, do you want to go Illusion because you can't do Spectral Doppelganger with a slam that's in a unit? There's a lot of stuff. You could take a skink character and put them on the end of the Temple Guard, but that character probably does just get killed pretty quickly. So, yeah. Anyway, I think this is probably needs looking at. I think it's, like, if you want to keep it this way, it's probably too cheap, but maybe we just shouldn't layer this many defensive buffs on the Temple Guard. I think they're already pretty hard to interact with anyway, which is fine. I think, so maybe putting that many more eggs in the basket is a little bit much there. Skaven Pelt banner shouldn't exist. No, I guess it gives frenzy. I hate seeing these banners that only affect certain armies. I'd forgotten that it gives you frenzy as well, so it is fine. But I just have a pet peeve about things that's like, specifically for playing against Skaven. So it's like, you'll never take this unless you're tailoring your list to play against an opponent. But if you're doing it narratively, like, oh, it's a campaign where my dwarves hate your Skaven or whatever, and that's fine. But then I think it just incentivizes people to, like, my friend always plays Skaven, let me just build a unit to beat him, which I think is unfun. Anyway, completely irrelevant to anything that we've been talking about there. Let's move on to Tome of Prophecy. Fear is fine. Well, fear is good. This is like the this is like for dwarves. Just in terms of, I always recommend that dwarves should have a Rune of Courage. It's funny because I don't necessarily default to thinking that you should have Rune of Courage. Gives you immunity to Fear and Terror. I don't automatically think that you should take this as Lizardmen because you've got the really, really good leadership from Cold-Blooded, but it's exactly the same thing, you know. You're still, there is a chance that you flee off the board and your Death Star dies, so maybe this is something you should look to fit in. But I just think it's hard to do because Sun Standard, I think, is so good, and Monster Hunter Tapestry is just almost always correct. If you're running an Infantry Death Star, it's just correct. Anyway, Jaguar Standard. This is interesting. It's kind of like Swift Stride, but not. Okay, that's a bad example of it. You roll an additional d6 when you pursue a charge, and then you discard the lowest. So it gives you more consistency. I think this is interesting. I could see this on... it's hard to say. Like, I guess I could see this on Cold One Riders for more consistency of charging, because I'm probably not trying to get charges all that much with my Temple Guard, because I can only charge 10 inches. So I'm not feeling like that's going to do a lot of good. Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. I'm just not sure which unit really benefits from it more than anything else. Venom of the Firefly Frog gives the unit poison attacks and magical attacks. Sure, that's fine. Instead of flaming attacks, I mean, flaming attacks are, well, thematic, I guess, because of the name. The flaming attacks are kind of just whatever. Rarely useful. Good into Tomb Kings, good into Trolls, negative into a number of other things because flaming attacks give some armies better saves. So, yeah, I don't really care about losing the flaming attacks other than the name. Magical attacks on an item. I think this is something that, if you look at Orcs and Goblins, they're a really good comparison, I think, to what Lizardmen want to do, if you look at, like, the more Orc side instead of the Orcs and Goblins. But if you're running Wyverns or Carnosaurs, you kind of just want to use the Great Weapon, either because, you know, you want to spend points defensively, or actually magic weapons are just not super worthwhile. But then the flip side of that is you then have bad matchups if you're ever playing into Ethereal, which sucks. And obviously, you know, Ethereal as a rule is designed so that it's good into certain things and it has weaknesses in combat res, but I think Ethereal right now is very strong, so having your characters tied up by it is not where you want to be. So being able to just give your characters magical attacks for 15 points, sure. Poison will rarely come up, I think, if you're putting it on the Saurus characters, because they have strength 5 inbuilt, but sometimes you'll be wounding dragons on 2s instead of 3s, and sometimes you'll be wounding my iron demons on 2s instead of 4s, which makes me sad. Other than that, what else have we got? The Ixty Grub. This is way, I think, way too good. So I said that all of my concerns are to do with really the spellcasting, and also my concerns are to do with, I have some concerns to do with points. this is the same cost as a power scroll, but then it gives you a flat +3 modifier to cast without making you more liable to miscasting. And obviously there are ways to get around the miscast. Specifically, slans famously, you can see here, there's the cupped hands of the old ones, there's other stuff in terms of miscast. So miscast can be less dangerous for Lizardmen in general, but this has been triple buffed. It's gone down in points. It's gone from a toughness test to a leadership test, which you will still then be able to use the cold-blooded on, so you're very likely to pass, especially if you're a slan. And even a skink with a leadership 6 has, I think it's like a 65% chance to pass or something like that, which for 20 points, like, YOLO, we'll just throw that out there. And then also it's taken off the if you fail it, you lose a wound. +3 to cast is disgusting. Like, in the modern game, I understand that this is what's printed in the legacy document, but the amount that you're getting there, changing the odds, is ridiculous. If you're casting at +2, or you're a slan, so you're probably going to be casting at +3, you're doubling how good you are as a caster for 20 points, and you could theoretically take lots of them. There are limitations, like, there is lots of good stuff you can do with a slan, but this is just too good for the points level. If we compare it to the Sacrosanct of the Lady, which is just, it always works, it's 30 points, you get a flat +2 to cast, I think you could leave this at 30 points and leave the, if you've failed the test, you lose a wound, and that would probably be fine. But by changing it to leadership, it's going to go off very consistently. I don't know what the leadership 9 on 3 dice is. It must be like you fail 3% of the time or something like that. It's a very low number. So let's just assume that it is effectively you get +3 to cast. So we definitely don't want to go down to cheaper than Sacrosanct. And then also, let's just leave that on there. You've got enough wounds on the slan anyway to whatever, and skinks are disposable enough that you've got 2 wounds. You shouldn't have failed 2 toughness tests, that sucks to be you. So anyway, my point is, this has been triple buffed. It was already kind of decent, I think, in terms of, it didn't necessarily fit into the playstyle or the builds, but what it brought was okay because of how much the casting value is. 20 points for this is too much. Make it 30, and put this line of text back in, and it's probably still really good. Cupped hands, the old ones, highlighted for maybe we should change this, but I haven't got round to it. Fair. 55 points for this is, I don't know. It's fun, but in a way it punishes enemy wizard spam lists. Like, basically this kind of punishes Wild Herd, but because it's when you miscast, and then it's a 2 in 6 that you get to do the effect, you're in a situation where you've got, like, what is it? Like, it's a 1 in 42, I think? Is that right off the top of my head? Let's just say it is. 1 in 42-ish that you will get this effect off every time you cast a spell. So if you're a slan, sure, you're probably casting between 3 and 5 spells a turn. On average, you don't miscast, every game. I guess technically, no, it's miscast a spell, so it's not if you're outclassed in the arts as well. It's literally only if you miscast. Yeah, I think 55 points for this is far too much. I'd love to see this just completely shut down Wild Herd casting, but it relies on you miscasting, so that feels pretty unlikely. I guess if you took this, make it cheap so I can just take like 4 power scrolls with it, and then I've got like a 7% chance to miscast instead of the like 2.5% or whatever it is. But yeah, this could do with being changed, I think. I don't know what to change it to though. Okay, so Slan can have up to 3 disciplines instead of just 1. They're capped at 100 points, and then they're only taken once per army as well. All right. So, in fact, let's look at the Slan first, because there are compounding buffs on this thing. So, it's been changed to infantry instead of a monstrous creature, so it can now, there's a rule in here where it goes back in with the Slan. You don't count as being in the fighting rank. This has been added because I think this rule was written before the second fighting rank was added to the game, so this has just been clarified. They've lost the 360-degree line of sight arc. I think that is okay. I think it's interesting. It also doesn't ignore models in the unit for drawing line of sight. Oh, wait, hold on. Hold on now. Why can't it ignore I somehow missed that last line. Ignores models in the unit for drawing line of sight. Cast and dispel as normal. Does that mean you can't cast magic missiles? I feel like that's not the intention here, because it's also lost large target. I think I'm missing something in my understanding of this, and I've only just noticed that last line that's gone now. So, if anyone can clarify for me how they're still able to cast magic missiles, because I'm sure they are. Otherwise, even though I've tried to avoid, leading into reading too much of other people's opinions, I feel like it would have been impossible to miss that. That would have been everywhere. Anyway, let's assume that they can still cast magic missiles, and we'll just move on to where we were with this. Okay, so the Palanquin has been changed to clarify how it works. So you're not in a fighting rank, which means you can't be challenged out. You can't be, you can't cast assailment spells because it's in there as well. So you can't do like the battle slan unless you're, I guess, flying around solo, which I don't think is good, but I guess it's fun if you want to do that. You just get like a meteor hammer and a meteor hammer and two of those grubs, and just be like, I'm gonna come for you, and go as hard as possible. Make sure you've given yourself the ethereal. Anyway, I'm getting off track. You're probably going to be inside a unit of Temple Guard. That feels very normal. So you're infantry, so you can do that. You're on a 60 mil base, so you can do that. You've got the Palanquin, so you can do that. All of that is clarified now. Good stuff. Wisdom of the Old Ones. This is something that worried me a little when it came up initially, because it gives you a lot of buffs. So you get to reroll one of the d6 when making a casting roll. This is a very, very powerful ability. It gives you a lot of consistency. You can't reroll a miscast, that's fine. And then you also know +1 spell in terms of the level of wizardry. Obviously, Slan are some of the best casters in the game. That makes a lot of sense, or they should be. And this leans into it. But we're already, we're a level 4 wizard that has access to 5 laws of magic here, including some of the better ones, in terms of we've got the control illusion, although I think especially losing the 360 line of sight, that's probably not the one you want to go for. Elementalism is just kind of always the right choice. Battle magic has some interesting play now, but I think it's not super valid in terms of the way that the unit's going to function. High magic is interesting. I will say high magic is interesting. I don't know that it's good. You could try and do like the ethereal unit, but I just don't think you need to. I think just give yourself a ward save and you're going to have more use. And then there's also necromancy, which I haven't really seen a Slan necromancy setup that I liked. I haven't really seen many of them either. So there's 4 laws that I think, or 3 laws. Elementalism, and then elementalism and friends. So you've got a good law / backup laws, and then you've got 2 casting, 2 wizard buffs already. So you can reroll one of the d6, and then you can also you also know +1 spell. So you've got a spell familiar and a reroll built in. Also, rerolling one of the d6 is much more powerful than rerolling both of the d6 in terms of, you can pick and choose when things are going to be useful. So you don't use it, obviously, if you roll like a 1 and a 2. You don't re-roll the 1 there because it's not worth your time. But if you roll a 5 and a 1, it doesn't say for a failed spell, you get to re-roll that 1 and then bring up the casting value potentially pretty significantly, yada yada. You got to use it smart, but it is just overall a much better buff than having a flat re-roll. The only time that would be wrong is if there was one spell that you absolutely had to cast, in which case I guess the flat reroll is probably better. But across the board, for your ability to be a wizard, this is a better buff. Anyway, so now we know what the Slan does. Let's have a look at what we've got here. Focus Rumination, 65 points, +1 to casting and dispelling. And you're able to cast 1 more spell than normal for their level of wizardry per turn. So you're casting at a native +3, you're dispelling at a native +3. You've still got the ability to reroll one of your casting rolls, and you can also cast a 5th spell. So you are literally a built-in 5th level wizard. This makes me a little concerned. I'm not saying it's a problem, but it's like immediately I'm like, ooh, that's a strong buff. Obviously, they lost the Engine of the Gods, so I'm not going to sit here and say it's too much. But this is just, for me, in my mind, this is something to look out for. I almost wonder whether it's because you can also still do stuff with items, right? You could go for like the Rod of Jet, the Wand of Jet, to get additional pluses to cast. you can still get up to +4 to cast, which is pretty high. Now, it's an inconsistent item, and other factions can do it, so maybe that's not actually the concern that it should be. But I look at it and go, there's a lot of casting potential in there. Plus, like, the accidental grubs. And it's this, remember, this doesn't come out of your magic items. This is, like, additional to. So you can do multiple things. But, yeah, this is very strong. But then also the +1 to cast from Engine of the Gods has gone away. So maybe it's not a problem. Highest state of mind, highest state of consciousness, 60 points. Is it just that's what it used to be called or something like that? Is that the reason he's changed the name on it? I'm not even looking at the right rules here. Yeah, it's literally just that he's changed the name. I'm sure there's a reason for that. I missed the explanation for that anyway. 60 points is probably too much, I think, because if you're ethereal, you can't join the Temple Guard unit, which seems to be the best way to do things. I'd probably make this cheaper. I think it doesn't need to be 60 points. I think if you want to run the Slan solo, which I still wouldn't do, this is necessary. And also because you can't turn it off. Like, it's not like you have the ability to become ethereal or something like that. You then never get to hide in a unit, unless I guess you cast Walk Between Worlds on them. No, because that's range self. So yeah, I think there's literally no way for you to join a unit here. Yeah, anyway, 60 points, probably too much there. Could be dropped down. Focus of Mystery. You do not randomly generate your spells. Instead, you know all of the spells from their chosen lore, and you can discard up to 2 of those spells in favor of up to 2 spells chosen from the lore of Lustria or their lore's signature spell. And you can't mix it with this one below, and it's 45 points. This is probably fine. I think the main value to this is not having the consistency of knowing every spell in the lore, although it is nice. It also doesn't, you can't, because you've got a cap of 100 points, you can't take it with Focused Rumination, so I think you're probably not going to see it. This is mostly allowing you to take your lore signature spell from your lore and also take Monsoon. I think that's really the main goal of it there. But I think Focus Rumination is still better, and you just accept that you're playing Elementalism because Elementalism is still the best lore to play, and you don't care about your signature spell, and then you just take Monsoon. So it exists, but I think for the better build, it doesn't do that, and I don't really see it as valuable over the +1 to cast. Wandering Deliberations. You know 5 spells, because obviously you know a 5th spell if you are a Slan. You get all of the signature spells from the lores and up to 2 of the signature spells from the lore of Lustria. So the problem is half of these lores. Some of these lores have bad signature spells. So Elementalism has a bad signature spell that's like a 12-inch range hex that it's like -1 to initiative and another stat, but it's like not a meaningful stat. Sorry, initiative and movement, I think it is. So I was meaning it's movement and another non-meaningful stat. So I guess it's initiative. My brain's just pulled that one out. Then there's Necromancy, which is an assailment spell, but you can't use assailment spells. Battle Magic, which is an assailment spell, so you can't use assailment spells. And then we've got Demonology and Dark Magic, which has 1 good magic missile and 1 mediocre magic missile. High Magic, which has a pretty good spell in that it has Drain Magic, increasing the casting value of enemy spellcasters' spells by 2 in range, but remember, it remains in play, so it can be dispelled, so it's got good but maybe limited application. Illusion for Glittering Robes is obviously very good, but, you'll lose giving up the ward save. And yeah, then you can take the Lore of Lustria spells, which probably need to be tweaked. So yeah, I think this is fine, and you can combo it with Focus Rumination. If you wanted to do a Magic Missile build, I don't think I do, but you just go like High Magic Illusion. Oh well, I guess you'd go High Magic. Well, you take one of these 2, depending on what you need to focus on, and then you take Double Magic Missile, you take Ruby Ring of Ruin. And that's probably just you play shooting platform and also some level of buffing / debuffing, depending on what you've gone for here. Or maybe you give up Dark Magic because the Magic Missile's less good. But yeah, I don't think this is a build that I would go for. I would just roll Elementalism. It's really good. It's just the way that you probably want to play it. Transcendent Healing, regen 5+, 35 points. That feels about fine, I think. I like that. Becalming Cogitation, 30 points, and you get to reroll 1 of the d6 when making a Wizardly Dispel attempt and increase their dispel range by 3 inches. This is, I don't know, like, I'm just, obviously, we're in a meta where there are really good spellcasters, so being able to dispel better is good. Did this even exist? 50 points before. Yeah, I just think, I don't know. Do I want this to be able to be stacked with Focus Rumination in terms of you're dispelling at a +3 and you reroll on the d6 and your 3-inch increased range? It's a lot of points. It is a lot of points. But if we're not thinking about how this army plays into specifically Beastmen, you know, does it just mean that you, at 27 inches on a unit that wants to be in the center of the board, so you're probably covering every part of the board in terms of casting, does it just mean that your opponent doesn't get spells off? Is that kind of the threat here? Like, I think that's maybe an exaggeration, but you can lean into it. Again, you could go like one of Jet to increase your dispel threat there. Or you could go like there's items you could go for. You could go for dispel scrolls or whatever. I just don't know. I feel like I worry a little bit about how much we're able to stack. Again, given how little granularity we have in terms of the ability to hand out buffs to the casting system because of how squished it is. So because it's so squished, being like, here's 2.5 buffs, the 3-inch range is like half a buff. You know, the positioning's nice. You're going to be in the middle of the board anyway, so I'm not going to count it. You've got 2 buffs to your dispelling threat. Does that just mean that most armies are going to struggle to cast spells into you? And not even at you because of magic resist? Is it like maybe you just never get your battle lust off because the slan's really good at turning it off? I don't know. It's a combination for sure. 25 points for magic resist 2. Roll a d3 before armies are deployed. Fine. I'm not going to take it. I'm just going to take Spelliterax, but I'm not opposed to it existing. Gains Terror for 20 points. Sure. Again, just a legacy rule, but whatever. And then Soul of Stone, 15 points, and you don't miscast the first time you roll a miscast. I don't know how I feel about this. Like, on paper, as someone who's mostly played against Lizardmen as opposed to played as them, I quite like being able to add or subtract the miscast. The way it used to work was when every time you roll on the miscast table, you can adjust the result by 1 to +or -1. So it means you're a little bit less likely to take big template damage. You're slightly less likely to screw yourself over in terms of turning off your ability to cast if you don't want to. Or if it's a spell that's really important and you roll a 7, you can just bump it up to 8 and you can get that, it's cast and your opponent has a chance to dispel it, or you can bump it up to the 10, 11, 12 effect and you weren't able to cast anyway, but now it's irresistible force. Maybe that's better instead of just ignoring the first miscast. I'm not sure. I don't know. The one thing that makes me sort of hesitate on this a little bit is that putting a strength 10 5-inch blast template over the center of your big Death Star kind of really sucks. So maybe this is just the thing to go for, and then you're like, okay, I've done a large blast template on myself, or like I've overwritten my defense on this. Maybe I'm a little bit more cautious with my casting now. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this one. This one feels like maybe it's change for change's sake, but I could be wrong with that. Then we have the spells. I'm going to start off with Monsoon. This is the one that I have big feelings about. And then we can talk about Apotheosis, because maybe you could even buff Apotheosis, honestly. Like, I'm kind of down to make Apotheosis better. Maybe I'm wrong on that one. I haven't really thought about the implications of it too much. But Monsoon, I think, as it exists, shouldn't exist. So, Monsoon, let's just have a look at the OG version, which is further down here. So, previously, it's a Vortex, cast on an 8, 15-inch range, 5-inch blast template, dangerous terrain, blocks line of sight, moves d6 inches in a random direction, and it drenches units which shoot at -1 to hit with ballistic skill shooting, and war machines are slightly less likely to shoot. But, there is something there. And this is for the rest of the game. This is just a debuff. The range has gone up to 18 inches. I don't feel like it needed to go up. 15 inches is already very generous in terms of a Vortex, I feel, especially for a large blast template, and that kind of just gets where you want it to. So I don't feel like the range needed to go up. I think 15 is fine. 18 I don't think is necessarily a problem, but it feels like a buff that didn't need to happen. Casting on a 10, this is arguably a buff because it's a remains in play spell. So this means, remember, to dispel, you need to beat the casting value to dispel. So if this is on the table, your opponent needs to get an 11, which means that if they haven't lent into magic defense outside of magic resist, which is kind of where people are going for their magic defense. This spell, they'll need to roll a 9 on the dice to get rid of, which is 27% of the time. So all you have to do is cast it once, or you can cast it, 4 turns. You can cast it turn 1 through 4, and on average, your opponent gets rid of it on one of those 4 turns, and it blocks line of sight, which is very, very strong. Something I talked about earlier was you can suicide a skink. You can... Well, okay, hold on. We'll get to that in a second. Basically, you can hide models in it because it's terrain, and you also count your aquatic units count it as open ground because it's a water feature and it blocks line of sight, so they can just very safely sit in it as long as your opponent doesn't dispel it. Anyway, so range, I don't think it needs to go up. That doesn't feel like a buff that needed to happen. Casting value 10, I don't think that needed to happen necessarily. I don't think this was intended as a buff, right? I think Val's looked at it and gone, I've made it better in these ways. It doesn't need to be cast on an 8 anymore. It needs to be cast on a higher value, and that's fair enough. But it's the double-edged sword of remains in play spells that you kind of have to care about what the value is, because this now puts it on par with, like, I don't know, the really hard to get rid of vortexes, I guess, Spiritual Vortex. It's kind of on par there in terms of how hard it is to get rid of, and that thing's a pain in the backside. So... yeah, I don't love that. Maybe it should go up to 9, but even then, like, 8 is maybe too easy to get rid of because your opponent gets rid of it. Assuming the standard, you've got +2 to dispel. They get rid of an 8 on a 6 on the dice. No, a 7 on the dice, sorry. So that's 56% of the time. Maybe that's too much in terms of what I want my opponent to be able to dispel my spell with. Maybe a 9 is a nice middle ground, somewhere between that 56% and 27%. It becomes like 1/3 of the time, or I actually don't know the number from the top of my head on that one, but dispelling it 1/3 of the time sounds about right, something along those lines. So maybe 9 is where that needs to go. Range probably needs to go back to 15. I don't think it needs to be buffed. Treating it as a water feature is a buff, and I think that's okay. I don't have a problem with that at all. It's been changed to may move, and it's been changed to in a direction of a caster's choosing. This shouldn't exist. Just straight up. This is not something that should be in the game. We saw the only template in the game that was able to do this nerfed, not only nerfed that spell, but completely, reworked how Vortex spells work. So now you can't, fire them through entire units. Obviously, this doesn't do damage. It does have a debuff, which is, it's better. We'll have a look at that one in a second. But... being able to choose whether to move it or being able to choose the direction of it is far, far too strong, because with Vortex spells now not being consistent in where the damage goes, I feel like the strongest aspect to them is their ability to block movement, block vision. Column of Crystal is an absolute pain in the backside. This is just Column of Crystal, but you get to move it, which is like Column of Crystal, which, it goes further than Column. And technically your opponent can move through it, although it's the dangerous terrain, but they can't charge through it, and they can't shoot through it, which is a lot of what you're looking to do with Column of Crystal. So it's worse in those ways, but you've got a lot of flexibility. I was talking about, you can march a skink up 12 inches, or fly a skink up however far on the Pterodon, and then Arcane Vassal through it with a Wind Blast, and then you put the Monsoon down, and then you move the Monsoon onto the top of that model, and then the model is hidden and can't be interacted with unless your opponent gets that, 27% chance to dispel. So, yeah, this Monsoon just shouldn't exist in the way that it did. Honestly, having played against Pip semi-recently, I think the version of it that it was before was not terrible. I think maybe you just buff it up to it's cast on a 9 instead of an 8, so it's a little harder for your opponent to remove. I think 8 is too easy to remove. Something to remember that in terms of how the Vortex spells work is because they don't go through units anymore in the way they did. They don't just rocket through in a straight line and keep going. It's a large blast template. You're kind of likely to go back where you were anyway, but there needs to be that element of chance in there. You can't, having it be able to, you can choose it is far too strong, and that shouldn't be in the game. We've seen it nerfed out of the game already. Let's just get rid of that. But you can just put it in, in front of a unit, and if it goes towards that unit, there's a very good chance it doesn't pop out the other side. There's a very good chance that it pops back out in front of it, and not only drenches it, which is kind of a whatever debuff for most units, but it also then puts that, piece of terrain in front, makes it, even if it doesn't block line of sight, because it's a wide unit, it provides the dangerous terrain in terms of you lose some movement, you take the lowest of the 2d6, all of that good stuff there. So, yeah, Monsoon, far too good. Let's just not add something to it that has already been nerfed out of the game. And then, probably just reset it back to put it as cast in a 9 and 15-inch range. And I think that's still like a spell that you're pretty happy to play with. But I would welcome comments on that one. Not as to whether this shouldn't exist, because I'm confident this shouldn't be existing. But is there another change that you think would be interesting to put in there? Because I've kind of just looked at it and gone, it was kind of fine. You could buff it slightly, and then it's still kind of fine. Or is there a more interesting way to have it that doesn't break the rules of the game? Let me know if you think so. Apotheosis. This has been changed. Previously, you were only able to heal infantry or cavalry, which meant that the maximum you could heal would be 2 wounds on your 3 wound characters, because the Slan was not infantry. You can now heal monsters, and you either heal 1 or you heal D3 wounds into monsters, and also you buff them, the character, to have fear. If they already have fear, they gain terror, which is kind of an unimportant rider, because if you're healing a Carnosaur, they have terror anyway, so it's whatever. I think maybe this could just heal all monsters. Like, maybe this could just be like, this spell can only target friendly multi-wound models. So, like, you could heal Croxagore with it. I think that would be okay. Healing Croxagore, healing Stegodons, but maybe you just make it so it only heals, like, a wound on monsters. Maybe it's just like, it default heal. You could make it 1 casting value instead of having the tiered. I don't think it needs a tier. Maybe just make that it heals 1 wound to monsters, or D3 wounds to other multiple wound models. Something like that. I don't think this is bad. I think being able to heal D3 on a Carnosaur is an interesting buff to the list, and it's, you're paying to take the spell in like soft power. You have to give up Monsoon, which I think needs to be changed, but you have to give up the signature spell you're going to be taking. You have to give up another spell to get there. So it's not like you just have this in your back pocket and you can do it all of the time. There is a cost. So I think having it, being able to do things that are relatively strong, I think is fine. Maybe just make it on an 8 or on a 9. You heal 1 wound to monsters, D3 to anything else, multiple wounds. See how that goes. But yeah, I think this could be stronger. This is the first thing that I'm going to say in terms of the magic system that could be buffed. So that's the one you get. Moving on to the units, we have kind of talked about Slan already. I've talked about them very heavily in terms of the other stuff they can do. I'm not really going to go into detail on them here because we've talked about them elsewhere, but I thought it would be weird to just start at the next unit and then someone would be like, oh, where's the Slan? So yeah, we've talked about Slan already. My thoughts are more about them as the vessel for all of the rules that are layered on top of them. Don't need to talk about them anymore. Saurus Heroes. This is your Lord and Hero level. And the first thing that I've noticed is they're still so expensive. These have what I would call the vampire problem, in that they look like they should be good characters, but they're kind of not. I think they're actually better than vampires, in that you've got so many attacks. You used to have 5 attacks plus Furious Charge. Furious Charge has now been replaced with Predatory Fighter, which is on 6s to hit, you gain an additional hit. So I think they're actually kind of okay fighters, but I just think they're not quite there. They don't have weapon skill 6. They're a little bit kind of not beefy. I feel like vampires and Saurus heroes should maybe just get a 4th wound or a 3rd wound on the hero level character. Like, bring them in line with the Tomb King and the Tomb Prince. That feels to me where these characters should be. They should have that level of heft in combat. Obviously, that would make the Carnosaur a little bit thicker, which I think I'm okay with. I don't really think I care too much about that. So, yeah, I think if you're keeping at this points level, just make them just a bit thicker here. Or, alternatively, I think they actually they compare very similarly in my mind to orc characters. And an orc lord is 110 points. So maybe we just say, we look at that sort of points level, we drop the cost on them, because they don't buff the unit in any way. All they bring is Rallying Cry, which is nice, to be fair. Rallying Cry is nice, but all they realistically bring is a boatload of great weapon attacks. And I'm not opposed to a boatload of great weapon attacks. In fact, I love a boatload of great weapon attacks. You know, back in school, they used to call me Edward, boatload of Edward attacks. Boatload of Edward attacks. I'm not going to fix it. That's just, it is what it is. But yeah, I think that's something that I would like to see changed in terms of points level. I think where they are, they need to either be cheaper or they need to be better, and they're kind of in the middle of just a little bit of a disappointment now. And again, that's not a problem with this document. That's just Lizardmen. I want to be clear when I'm criticizing Lizardmen, because otherwise I feel like it's going to sound like I'm ragging on this document, and I really quite like this one. So I want to point out that a lot of my complaints are just like the base work is kind of shit, and then anything on top of that is having to struggle its way through. I do like the change here to Armored Hide. I will say, seeing Armored Hide 3 on a lot of things is very bizarre. Like, I'm reading that and going, that kind of makes me feel uncomfortable in a way. It's just different. I'm not saying it's wrong, but you're looking at it like, I ain't never seen Armored Hide 3 before. That's weird. That's a lot. But I think it's a relatively good change just in terms of, if you want to give your model good saves, get rid of this scaly skin, which counts as armor, and then you've got the whole, can I buy magic armor, can I not? Give them the ability to buy light armor here, which effectively gives your Saurus hero the equivalent of being able to buy full plate. Maybe, you could argue that this should be slightly more, but I think going from heavy armor to full plate for 3 points seems about right. Maybe you put it to 4 points, I don't know. We're quibbling over minor details here, so it doesn't matter. But it does mean if you're mounted on a Carnosaur with light armor and shield, you're default getting a 3-up armor save. There is one thing. So if we go down to the Carnosaur here, the Carnosaur has what's it equipped with? Heavy armor. This needs to go away, because right now you can combine the this is full credit to Gaunt Herder, who came into chat when I was doing Fix My List on Friday. You can combine the Armored Hide on this model with the heavy armor on the Carnosaur, and you can also buy the Meteoric Iron, and then you get to choose between which of those you like, because the wording on is like, oh, you just choose the better of the two saves, and it's like, well, which one's arguably better? Is a 3-up save that can be reduced better than a 5-up save that can't be reduced? Sometimes not. So a bit of a loophole there. I think I'd just like to see that clarified. I think the easiest way to do it would just be to say this, like, Armored Hide brackets does not apply to mount, or like a little note underneath. Oh yeah, here we go. Note that this special rule does not apply to this model mount should it have one, and you just put the Armored Hide on there, and then you can still be like, hey, this model can get a 3-up save itself very comfortably, but the Carnosaur, you don't get a double dip. You shouldn't be able to double dip realistically. Whether or not it's a point of power that makes the army better, sure, it probably just also shouldn't exist as like this feels like a loophole. Anyway, other than that, I do wonder if the Scar Veteran should just have Armored Hide 2 as well, in terms of bringing it in line with the Saurus Warriors. It does make them like very armored in terms of they have default full plate, and then they can buy a shield anyway. But I actually don't think I care in terms of, like, it's infantry characters. Are we pissing and moaning about how tanky an infantry character is, or a cavalry mounted character is, that isn't a wizard? All they're bringing is like some strength 7 great weapon attacks, which again, I love strength 7 great weapon attacks, but like I don't think it's a problem. So yeah, I think this probably just becomes Armored Hide 2. And I'm not upset that, Val's maybe lent towards a slightly more conservative approach here. I think this one can go to I think you could go up to Armored Hide 2, drop this to like 110 and 60 points, or like 55, whatever an Orc War Boss is, and then from that point, or give them an extra wound and look at the points of the Tomb King and the Tomb Prince. Although I think the buffs that those two characters bring are more exciting than the rules on the Saurus characters. So you probably wouldn't need to go up to the 160 that a Tomb King is. Maybe 140 is right if you just give them +1 wound to bring them in line with the Tomb King. I don't know. Anyway, Predatory Fighters is pretty cool. Losing Furious Charge kind of sucks a little bit, but Predatory Fighters with 5 attacks is almost as good mathematically, assuming you're getting exploding hits on 6s, with 5 attacks. And then if you're ever getting it on 5, so if you've got any rerolls, then it becomes better. So yeah, I don't know. It's fine. I like it. Your default build, great weapon, Carnosaur, ward save, maybe an armor save. Jobs are good, and leave it there. Let's not mess around. So yeah. When I was talking about builds, there was a magic item that I said I was going to highlight, and why I didn't think the Ore of Quetzal was a problem, because my initial thought was you can stack this on a Carnosaur with the Sun Standard. So you'd have a very expensive hero level character, but they'd be -1 to shoot and -2 to hit in combat. And then I was like, oh, that seems like it's kind of a problem. And I was like, oh, you can't make them tanky. You'd have like a Charmed Shield for a 5 at ward save once per game. And I'm like, okay, so it just dies to cannonballs. So I think it's probably not an issue at all. But it is very funny to me that you can be like, I'm just going to double stack them. Fortunately, saved by the fact that you have a maximum of 50 points of magic items. So it's actually not an issue at all. But yeah, I did spot that one, did think about it, and then I calmed down. Cool. So Saurus, let's have a look at the Carnosaur, because there are some buffs here. And I think it makes sense to talk about the whole package, because let's be honest, if we're seeing Saurus characters, we're seeing them on Carnosaurs. I can't believe he's gone to weapon skill 4. Traditionally, this model's had weapon skill 3. It's in the fluff, it's famous for chasing dragons out of the jungle. It's so good at hunting them, and then famously it now hits them on 5s. This is fine. I haven't seen any other mounts that have such low weapon skill. Like, weapon skill 3, I think, is almost criminal in terms of how bad it is. If your whole thing is that you're really good at hunting dragons, which feels a little bit less, good now for the dragon players, now that they're living in post 1.5 land where dragons are not the be all and end all. But, it's okay for this to be specifically good at killing monsters. Hitting those monsters on a 5 was bad, and also only having 4 attacks with it was, not great. And they have other downsides in there as well. Blood Frenzy, if you ever actually manage to get a wound through, and let's be real, you're only doing 1 wound, which might be like 2 damage on average, then you become frenzied, which you don't get the benefit to because they nerf frenzy. So anyway, Carnosaur, weapon skill 4, completely fine. And it's gained Predatory Fighter, so you get exploding 6s. I think that is probably fine, because I think it's an underwhelming combat model. But it's one that I'd keep a slight eye on, just in general. I don't think it's a problem, because you're going to be hitting... You're not going to hit anything that matters on better than a 4. I mean, you're going to hit everything in the game on a 4. And if you're killing infantry, cool, you're killing infantry. Like, oh no, the Carnosaur killed 4 of my veteran state troops. No, not even veteran state troops, my regular state troops. Sure, yeah, okay, fine. I don't care. So I think it's probably fine. I don't think this skews the maths enough in a way that's a problem, because you're getting an average of like 0.66 extra hits per roll. Sometimes you'll spike, and that'll be memorable. And it's memorable in a way that it kind of sucks for your opponent, but in a way where your opponent rolling well sucks just in general. I think, for me, when I think about stuff like this in terms of like, is it feels bad for my opponent, which is something I'm very keen to avoid, with these being, for lack of a nicer term for it, they are homebrew, and it does have relatively widespread adoption. What we don't want is, if you're committed to having this as a solution because Games Workshop isn't supporting the game, you don't want people to be turned off because they're like, I played against Lizardmen and they just did loads of bullshit. In my mind, it's not really that sort of feels bad. It's kind of just, that's Warhammer, baby. I thought I was going to get out there. My dragon, I charged in. He had 1 wound with the Carnosaur. I flubbed. And then he rolled 3 6s to hit me. And he ended up doing, 10 damage to my dragon that was completely unwounded. And you're like, you just got Warhammered, baby. And I think that's a memorable story as opposed to like a feels bad. Anyway, that just to maybe shines a slight amount of light on what could come across as maybe like an inconsistency in philosophy on whether or not I think something should exist. by the by. Slashing Talons. It used to be multiple wounds against monsters only, and now it's multiple wounds against specifically everything in the game. I don't know how I feel about this. I think it's okay. Like, so for me, Carnosaurs are terrifying because I love playing monsters, and I've been playing a lot of Chaos Dwarves recently, and they wound Taurus on 4s. So it's kind of like, I'm leaning on my toughness. You get through my toughness. You've got AP3, you're going to get through my armor save, and then I've only got like a 5-up ward save, so I'm very scared about that as a Chaos Dwarf player. And then multiple wounds D3 when you've only got 7 wounds is very scary. Being able to, for my opponent to do that to my Iron Demon as well, when I have a worse ward save, is also very scary. But does that mean it shouldn't exist? I don't think so. I think it's just my gut feel is like, oh, all of those games I've played with Chaos Dwarves, this makes Carnosaurs even more scary. I don't know how I'll deal with them. I think it's fine. I think it's probably okay. It kind of specifically screws over, so chariots, but you don't see a lot of chariots, and then also monstrous infantry, and you don't see a lot of monstrous infantry. So I'm not sure it's a problem, and it just makes it more consistent in what it does. So if your opponent's bringing like a tooled up chariot, you still get to use your rules instead of it just being only monsters in a game where we're seeing less monsters because of changes in the meta. So yeah, I think it's fine. But maybe one in yellow just in case it somehow makes it too oppressive. I really can't see it being like that, though. Skink Heroes. These are maybe the... Well, not the first. I think the Slans pointed okay. But unlike the Saurus Heroes, I think 60 points for level 1 and 45 points for a Skink Hero feels pretty okay. They also have lost the light armor and gone to Armored Hide 1, which does have an unintended interaction, or I think unintended, in that if you put a Skink Chief on the back of a regular Stegodon, they get a 3-up armor save without having to buy any armor or anything like that. So I think that should probably be fixed, just the similar to Carnosaurs. Not going to go on about that. I think it just needs to be, let's put the star that's next to Aquatic next to Armored Hide as well, and then jobs are good. Other than that, the changes here, the Skink Chief can have light armor, again, just to make sure that you can buy magic armor there. Good change, and it also lets you get to default a 4-up armor save or a 3-up save in combat with the hand weapon shield combo if you want to. You can give them Scouts and Vanguard, which is nice, because those are rules that you can just buy for Skinks, or you can have Chameleon Skinks that can do those things. In terms of, well, I guess it's ambush for Chameleon Skinks more than anything else. And they're loners, so ignore me entirely. But this is nice. This just means that you can put characters up the board, but it's specifically just the Skink Chief, so you're not able to Scout or Vanguard your Skink Priest that can Arcane Vassal. So I think that's good. I like the way that it's been added in here instead of just giving it to everyone. So good changes there. I'll talk about the mounts more specifically when we get to them, because unlike the Carnosaur, these are all units that exist outside of just the characters, but I think there's some fun stuff you can do. Blowpipes have been changed to have move and shoot, which I think is probably wrong, just in terms of differentiating it from the javelins. Javelins have move and shoot, poison attack, and I think that's it. I don't think there's anything else on there. Do I need to scroll up to the... Is there not an actual item pool in here? It's just the regular javelin. Yeah, so javelins... is it on here? This is where I probably should cut this out, but I'm not going to. You can all see me failing to find javelins. Off the top of my head, basically, you don't have multiple shots, but you have move and shoot, and you have quick shot as well. That's the differences. This having move and shoot now means that the blowpipes can move 12 and still shoot twice, which is... It kind of means like they're taking up the same space as the javelins. But then with the javelin, more specifically for the Skinks, you can take shield, so maybe it's not a problem. But yeah, I just don't know if they need to gain move and shoot. Maybe they gain quick shot. Maybe that's the way to do it. I'd be more happy to see them gain quick shot, so they don't take penalties for moving and shooting, as opposed to being able to march and shoot, but then still take penalties. Yeah, in fact, no. Let's change move and shoot for quick shot. Then you can always stand and shoot with them, which kind of makes sense to me. A blowpipe, theoretically is quite a fast weapon to fire. And then also you're able to shoot at ballistic skill without penalty apart from long range or, cover or whatever. So I think, yeah, multiple shots, you're already taking a penalty there. Let's just not stack the penalties by giving them quick shot. Anyway, moving on. Mounts we'll talk about later. We'll talk about all of this. All of this is related to the units, so we'll just address all of the changes as we get to them. And then we're done with characters, which is pretty quick. And we're on to the skink cohorts. So, there are some problems here, but there's some great stuff as well. I'm very keen to see it back in, see them back in since the first time in, is it 6th edition they were in last in? I can't remember. They have the stat line of skinks. Cool. You can take them in units of 10, which is good. If you could take them in units of 5, I think you could do even more heinous stuff with them and just pay less points for how heinous you're going to get. You must take one of the following. You can take the short bows. So if you've got those 6th edition starter box set models, fantastic for you. Or is it 5th edition? Whatever edition it was with the starter box models. Blowpipes, which again we should probably change to quick shot instead of move and shoot, and then javelins and shields, which I think is going to be the default a lot of the time, just in terms of you then get your 4-up save in combat, which means you're like a moderately decent combat unit, even though you do have a 2-up armor save. But it's mostly important in my mind to lower the damage coming back at you. Short bows are fine because they are poison short bows, so that's not terrible. And it says poison attacks, javelins and short bows only, but if you look at the blowpipes, they have poison attacks built in. So all of their weapons have poison at shooting, not in melee. They can have full command, 5 points per model, cool, and 0 to 1 Croxigar per 8 skinks for a maximum of 3 at 49 points each. Here's the problem. Monstrous infantry are kind of crap. I don't think putting monstrous infantry in the skink cohort makes them good, which is a shame. Maybe it does, because they have a rule here, and I'm not going to... This is a wordy rule. I think it needs to be a wordy rule. Basically, it means that you can't target them with shooting unless there's less, 5 or less... I think it's less than 5 rank-and-file skinks. And then also you get to fight in combat as if you were in base-to-base with an enemy model, but then also the Croxigors can be attacked back in combat. So your opponent can choose to kill the Croxigors in combat, they just can't pick them out in the shooting. And that's cool, and I like it, and it's thematic. Here's the problem. You can just spam skinks in core. You can be like, hey, let's just go 4 units of skink cohorts and 4 units of skink swarms, or whatever they're called, the regular skinks. And that's probably just, again, it's not necessarily competitively an issue, but I think it's not a good way to push the core. And I think if you're thinking about Lizardmen, if I think about Lizardmen, that sort of slant in the temple guard surrounded by like a cloud of skinks and some monsters in there as well, that sort of classic image of what you see for Lizardmen, I think this maybe pushes you away from doing it, because just having that core that you don't have to dedicate loads of points into one brick, and then you also don't care if it dies, is really strong in its own way. I think maybe they should have open order instead of close order. I don't know what they used to have, but I feel like in terms of how I see this unit, open order maybe makes more sense. I'm not necessarily opposed to them having close order, but I think just in terms of ranked up skinks obviously like skirmishy have been in this game, I think open order makes more sense to me. Again, I don't think it's a problem. It's just thematically, maybe I'd put open order there. And also, because they're ranked up, it gives them some nice flexibility in terms of their movement. So maybe that'd be good. But then they move 6 inches anyway, so maybe it doesn't matter. Yeah. Other things you can do with them. You can spend 50 points, you can put them in marching column, and then you can march 18 inches. And you can just do what Chaos Warhounds do, but also they have like javelins and shields or blowpipes or short bows, so you can flex them. You can do marching column shenanigans, you can move block, you can be a pain in the backside. I think giving skilled Lizardmen players the ability to run 8 units of skinks, 4 of which are in marching column, might be too good. So maybe the way to deal with that is to say skink cohorts and regular skinks come from the same pool. So you can run 4 units of skinks in core, just, that's how many you can run in the match play guide, but you have to choose between cohorts and regular skinks. Or, so, if someone is more of a skink enthusiast and wants to have the ability to play with a full skink army, maybe the change is that you just say 1 plus Croxigor. So you're running them as the cohort has to be run with the Croxigor, and that way you're not limited. You're not having these sort of like super mobile units that just get to run around and do things. So I like the cohorts, but I just think it'd be nice to not have the ability to just give Lizardmen more movement-based shenanigans instead of having them play, in the way that traditionally you'd see them on the table, and I don't mean competitively. I know skink clouds have been good for a long time. I don't want to go back to that. I don't want more skinks. I think that's something that I'd like to avoid. Anyway, cool to see them back. Skink skirmishes, +1 point per model. They were already very good. They were probably one of the best things. They're definitely one of the best things in the book. Probably the best unit in the book. So going up from 5 to 6 points, I think, is super fine. And they gain aquatic. So fun. But yeah, this is absolutely fine. You're still going to just run loads of them. They were just... When the faction was worse, they propped up the faction more. Now that theoretically the faction has buffs, taking some power out of them is probably for the best. Chameleon skinks, these are not in core, these are still special, but they have some additional rules. So they have aquatic, which they didn't have before, which again, cool, glad to see. It's a little bit of a thematic change, but also it might come up sometimes. They've gained loner, so you can't join characters to them, which I think just thematically makes sense. That's fine. Fire and flee, which I think is super fine. You're going to be, doing your shooting with them and then running away. That seems like they're a very sort of jungle hit and run style unit, so I think that makes perfect sense. Chameleon, which gives them an additional -1 to be shot. I don't know. I think it's probably okay. But I don't know, it's quite easy to stack additional penalties to hit on units if you position them at all well. You put one skink behind a piece of terrain or behind another unit or something like that, and then suddenly you're -1 to hit because you're partially obscured. So being able to be -3 against ballistic skill shooting is quite punishing. But then on the same, the other hand, they just die to a Ruby Ring of Ruin. Their strength, their toughness too. So on average, like I'd be taking maybe 6 of these, giving them ambush, and if my opponent gets Ruby Ring of Ruin off, I get 7 hits on average. The entire unit just dies on average dice because they don't have. Oh no, sorry, that's not true. They have a 6-up armor save. They don't have a shield. So yeah. This should be changed, I think, to Armored Hide 1. Val did mention that he'd had to rush this more in terms of getting it out before the FAQ. So there are some inconsistencies like that, but I think it's just this will be updated to be the same as everything else. Yeah, I think this is probably fine. It gives me pause. Like if there's when we saw, the Skaven book came out and people were buying 30 of the Poison Wind Globadiers, that was a sign to be like, hold on now. So if people are rushing out to buy, 30 Chameleon skinks, then this is obviously too much. But I think it's probably okay, purely because you can't stack magic resistance to them. But yeah, interesting either way. I like them. They've also gamed ambush. I talked about Chameleon, and didn't talk about ambush. Just having a cheap-ish unit that can come in from the backfield to threaten baggage trains, scoring, be a pain in the backside. I'm a big fan of that. I don't like expensive units that do that, but, if I take 6 of them, and probably don't even take a unit champion, 66 points for 6 models, I think that's fine. And again, give them quick shoot instead of move and shoot, and I think you'll be happier, especially because you can't march when you come in from ambush, but you do count as moving, so taking away that penalty would be better for them. Buff Chameleon skinks, that's what I'm saying. Speaking of buffs, Saurus Warriors, down to 12 points from 14, I think. Where were they initially? I think the base platform of a Saurus, there is, like, it is a sturdy enough chassis that at some point, if you make it cheap enough or you layer enough buffs on it, it's going to be good. It's T4, it's got 2 attacks, it's got AP1 hand weapons, it's got a 3-up armor save, and that continues. I think we're not there. I think the meta's not there. So, if the meta changes and suddenly tanky infantry are the be-all and end-all, which would be kind of interesting to see. I don't know how they get there. But then at 12 points, I'm interested in these things. I think, unfortunately, Saurus Warriors don't make it onto the table for me. But I also don't think they should get buffed anymore. Like, they lose Furious Charge, or maybe, no, they never had Furious Charge, sorry. They gain Predatory Fighters, so they've gained 0.3 of an attack per model. Yeah, I think that's fine. They gain the Drilled special rule, which was justified because they are that sort of cold logic robotic lizards, and they should function in that way. I think this is fine. In my mind, Like you look at dwarves. Dwarf warriors don't have drilled, but Longbeards have drilled. And you could say, well, Temple Guard are the equivalent of Longbeards. I'd say actually Temple Guard are the equivalent of like Hammerers or something like that. And it's just because they're a legacy army, you can't take them in core through an arcane journal. So the way that that's been unlocked is by having, the ability to take them if you take a certain character, which is a very legacy thing to do because they're not getting that additional support. So in my mind, I think this is the middle tier. This is Saurus Warriors are the Longbeards of the book, and the Skink cohort is kind of the Dwarf Warriors of the book there, and then Temple Guard are the Hammers or the Iron Breakers. So having drilled here, I think is fine. I don't have a problem with it, and I also don't know that it makes that much difference specifically for Saurus Warriors. Right, being able to take a magic standard is nice. I think they could take a 25-point one. No, they couldn't. They could just take magic items up to 25 points, and you can still buy Shield Wall. And you can pay a point to take spears, which you just won't do. I think this unit just remains mediocre, but I wouldn't like to see them buffed in any further way. I think -2 points, give them the ability to take drilled and the ability to take a magic standard, which like literally every core unit in the game is able to do outside of like a couple of legacy holdovers. Yeah, sure. I think this is fine. It's not good, but don't make it better. I think this is as much as it should be buffed. And let's hope that in 2 weeks' time we get some interesting buffs. I think would be my take on them. Temple Guard, though. Let's remind myself how much Temple Guard are. Okay, so they've only gone down a point, which is fair, because I think Temple Guard are kind of interesting. I think they're not terrible. They have weapon skill 4 over the Slan. They also over the regular Saurus. They also have +1 initiative, which I don't know if they need. Maybe that's from a previous edition. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to double check what they had in the previous edition here. If we look at 8th edition. I assume there is a reason that he's buffed it, and obviously he's buffed it previously. Okay, so here in 8th, they were Initiative 2, and Saurus Warriors were Initiative 1. Okay, fair enough. That's why. I don't have strong feelings on whether they should or shouldn't be. Initiative 2 is still bad, but at least at that point, you can strike before great weapons with your halberds if you want to. I think you're usually going to want to use hand weapon shield, but that has changed a little bit because there are some nice buffs in here. So they've gone down a point. They're down to 15 points per model, which is still pricey for a unit, but you can take them in core, so that's fine. You can buy drilled for them. Could they not buy drilled before? God damn. Didn't even realize. Okay, I think they definitely should be able to buy drilled. Like, they're an infantry unit. Like, they're the most elite infantry unit you can buy in the book. They thematically should have it. Drilled on them is fine. Cool, love it. They gain Predatory Fighter. They gain Armored Hide 2, and they have light armor, which model-wise, that's correct. That's what the models look like, so I'm on board with that. And shields. But what that means is, previously in combat, you'd have a 3-up armor save because of the parry rule. You'd have heavy armor, or heavy armor equivalent, plus shield, getting you to a 3-up save. Now you've got full plate equivalent and shield, which gets you to a 3-up armor save. But now you might actually use the halberds, which I think is cool. I still think what's going to happen is I'm going to get, if I'm playing Temple Guard, my opponent's going to charge me because I'm standing on an objective with like my Death Star, which is 1,000 points, and my opponent's gone, they're scoring points in the center of the board, and also I need to kill them to get points. So I've decided I'm going to go for it. I'm going to tank that. I'm either going to stubborn backwards with Shield Wall, or I'm going to win on combat res and my ability to hit back like moderately okay, depending on what target is and what they're going for. And then, let's say I win combat, they fall back in good order, I follow up, I get the initiative bonus, I'm going to go in with halberds at initiative 5 and get the charge bonus on the halberds as well, so that they're strength 5, AP 2, armor bane 1. And I think that's kind of cool. I like that they have that space. This kind of mirrors what I've been doing with the Infernal Guard, not even Infernal Ironsworn, just Infernal Guard for Chaos Dwarves, where you put some buff characters in there as well, and you buy great weapons for them, you tank the charge when you have your armor shield, and then you go in and you hit a bit harder next turn. So yeah, big fan of that. Even though they're going to full plate, they're dropping a point, I think that's fine. Like, they're good. I think they're a part of a list that you'd expect to see, but I also think they're just very, very pricey in terms of, like, especially because the Slan's so expensive, you probably want to take that -1 to hit banner, which is 65 points. That's the equivalent of, 5 or 6 Temple Guard. So you're gonna struggle to fit as many in as possible, I think. And we know how we feel about spending more than 500 points in core as Warhammer players. We want to spend it on all the fun toys. So if you're trying to fit in skinks, and you're also trying to fit in a big brick of Temple Guard, and then you're like, what else can I do? I think you're eating into your, the points that you might prefer to spend on, I don't know, Bastillodons or whatever flavor of the list you want to go with. But we'll look at those in a moment. So yeah, I think that's fine. And also Slan in the unit can issue and accept challenges in the same manner as a character. So just the standard rule that you see on a lot of things. Yeah, cool. Can be joined by the Slan, and then they can all challenge. Sure. This is standard. I hate it as a rule, but I don't think it's a problem in terms of this is just something that you can see for other armies that have it. Great. Love that. Anyway, Croxagore, 49 points. They haven't changed in points at all. They're very expensive monstrous infantry. They have defensively full plate now, which is nice, because normally that's kind of like the sticking issue I have with monstrous infantry. But if you look at a bull in terms of, or let's say, I don't actually know how much a Iron Gut is off the top of my head. It's like high 30s, mid to high 30s, maybe. I want to say 39 points. Like, is a Croxagore 10 points better than a Iron Gut? I think no. Even with great, full plate and a great weapon that's strength 7, you're still weapon skill 3. Yes, you've got predatory fighters, which gives you a little bit of consistency, or like a little bit more oomph in there as well. But you're going to be hitting on 4s at best. You might hit on 5s. You're going to be wounding most things on 2s, sure. But then you've got no rerolls, which is fine. But it's just, with the low number of dice, it's very easy to go south on it. You've only got 3 attacks. I just don't think I'm paying 50 points for a monstrous infantry model. Which then, when you're talking about the skink cohort, do I want to pay to put Croxagore in there? Maybe not. Other than it being super cool, I just think these need to come massively down in points. I think this is one of the things that's massively overcooked in the Legacy Draft, and the Legacy Draft. Yeah, I guess they never really play tested them, did they? The original documents. So I think this could do with coming down in points. Other than that, I have no real thoughts. They keep skirmish screen, even though they kind of are doing the same thing with the cohort, but I think that's fine. I'm not opposed to having that there. Jungle Swarms remain exactly the same. They are 5 wounds. They are unbreakable. They have skirmish and immune psychology. If you want them to do a job, they do a job. I'm not massively swarm-brained at the moment, but they've got poison attacks in there as well, so sure. Salamanders. They are unbreakable, yes. Salamanders. Let's have a look at Salamanders and Razordons, because they have changed in interesting ways. So, when I was watching, something that I heard Val say is that they've got reserve move and move and shoot, but that was more because he couldn't choose which one to go with. So I'm going to treat this as if one of them is going to be removed. I think with both of them, they're probably, I don't want to say too good, but like it's just too much. They still fire as if they have column of fire, which is still bad. And it's strength 4 AP 2, so their damage is better than it was. Flame templates are like, they're kind of okay. The problem is you roll an artillery die from where you place the flame template, and then it goes that distance. So it's not only a flame template, which is kind of hard to set up, although with move and shoot, maybe it'd be easy to set up if you're marching 12 inches and then putting a flame template there. But they're a little hard to set up in terms of getting the value from them, and then you try and position them to hit as many models as possible, but then you've got the random aspect of the artillery dice. So I think maybe they could have done with just a breath weapon and not spat it further. I don't know. I don't really know how I fix Salamanders in terms of just having a breath weapon that's meaningful, that doesn't suck. I think templates are bad in this edition in general. I think templates that like default scatter through, and you have no chance of hitting, and you have no consistency with it, and no rerolls, like the flame template, the flame breath, column of fire, even worse. So yeah, I don't have solid, I don't have favorable opinions on how a salamander breath weapon works. They are 3 wounds, or kind of 6 wounds at T5, because you roll to wound and then you get the 4-up armor save from the plated carapace. So that's kind of cool. Again, that should probably just be armored hide 3, I think, just for consistency, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, 65 points as well. I think, did they used to be 75? Let's have a quick look at the salamanders. They used to be 75 and you had to pay for the skinks, whereas now you don't. So it's gone down from 90 points to 65. I think you could see it on the table. I'm not in love with how it works, but I think it is now functional to the point where if you want to put one on the table for beer and pretzel hammer, it doesn't feel terrible. You might have it do something and be like, oh man, that was cool. And it does get around magic resist and negatives to hit for ballistic skills shooting. So in that aspect, maybe there's some strength there that it's worth playing around with. I don't think this is it, but yeah. In terms of move and shoot and reserve move, I personally feel like move and shoot makes more sense for them. They are skirmishers, so I think I'd rather just be able to march them and then shoot the flame template where I want it to go. I think reserve move would be strong, but I think just in terms of thematically how they work, just give them move and shoot over reserve move. I also feel like it's less of a big change in terms of like if they end up being decent, people are going to be less annoyed if you've got move and shoot on the breath weapon than being able to like shoot and scoot, which is typically something that gets right on people's nerves. But that would mean that you're able to be a little bit more safe with your shooting. I just think let's not try and put more shoot and scoot in the game, because it always makes people sad. And move and shoot so you can actually get the breath template where you want it to go feels pretty reasonable to me. Secondly, why I think you shouldn't go with reserve move is because the Razordon doesn't have it. And obviously the Razordon is not the same unit, but it's the same in a lot of ways. It's got the same stat line here. You know, you've got all of the same stats across the board. It's still got the same interactions in terms of the skink handlers, so it's effectively the same thing, just with a different coat of paint. So keeping them more consistent between the two by not going reserve move and having just their weapons be different makes a lot of sense to me. Cool. Speaking of weapons, I didn't hear the justification for this one. I didn't hear if there was justification. I think this might need to be tweaked, and by might need to be tweaked, I'm 100% certain this needs to be tweaked, because I don't think this is doing exactly what Val envisioned it to be. So, looking at the 8th edition version of Razor Barbs, they had a need more nails style, like cannon fire shooting that was strength 4, so it was strength 4 AP1, which it looks like it's the same here, but the difference is in 8th edition your grape shot had to roll to hit. So need more nails, the grape shot is just auto hitting. So right now you're paying 75 points per model. You can run them in multiple models in the unit, and they have move and shoot, so they can march and shoot, again keeping it consistent with the salamander if you give it that rule. But they can march 12 inches and then shoot 12 inches with artillery dice shots that automatically hit. On top of that, they've got quick shot, which means that they can always, so there's no penalty to the hit roll, but you're not making a hit roll. On top of that, they don't have cumbersome, so they can stand and shoot. I don't think a mobile unit in this edition of the game should ever really have auto hitting attacks. That feels too good, too outside of what is expected. But the big problem I have with this is I think that's way too good for stand and shoot. Just being like, stand and shoot comes with like it's inherently got a hit penalty. It should be harder to do damage. You don't want to feel like you can't charge something because you're too worried about it. Sure, if it's like a dedicated full shooting unit and you're charging in, you're expecting to take some penalties. But if you've got a unit that is a mobile, like mid-tier beast that does some shooting, I don't think the shooting is necessarily the full identity of it. I think of these as sort of like all-rounders that are like decently tanky, decently hitty, decently shooty. It's kind of like an all-rounder. I wouldn't feel comfortable charging a squad of 2 of these with some sort of core heavy cavalry. I think I'd just lose, and I think I'd lose in a kind of disgusting way. If you're averaging like, I think assuming you don't roll a misfire, it's like an average of 12 hits. Into Empire, that's 6 wounds, 3 dead. That feels very punishing in terms of what you can get there. I just think I don't think we should have a unit here that has automatically hitting ballistic skill shooting. Obviously, it's not ballistic skill, but automatically hitting shooting. Or if you really want to keep it, which I don't think it should be kept, I think it needs to gain cumbersome, so it can't just automatically hit into a stand and shoot. I would not be opposed to giving it more rules on here. So the multiple shots D3 that it had before. So if we look at this version, this is awful. This is a bad gun. This is not worth playing. I'm not saying go back to this. The long range is nice, but multiple shots D3 means that a third of the time you shoot one shot, but you still get -1 to hit for no good reason. Just because that's how multiple shots work. You're using multiple shots. Even if you're multiple shots 1, you're hitting at -1 to hit. The quick shot is nice because you don't take a move and shoot penalty. But you could probably go with something between this and here. 12-inch range, I'm not opposed to it still being 18-inch range. Maybe just 1 artillery dice worth of shots, whether you want it to be strength 3 or strength 4. And then maybe give it doesn't take a penalty for long-range shooting, so that you're kind of just hitting on 4s all of the time. Like, the only thing that affects you is the stand and shoot penalty and the ability, the, like, cover or other modifiers in there. Just default, getting, like, 6 hits on average, six shots on average, hitting with 3 of them, and then even if you're strength 4 AP1, like, 2 wounds on average, take some saves, you might kill a model. I think that feels more reasonable in terms of where I would want this to be. But yeah, I think this one needs to be changed. This is and I think it might, like I said, I didn't hear the justification for it. This might be that Val had missed that Grape Shot was ballistic skill focused in previous editions. It'd be really funny if I got that wrong. I'm fairly confident. I read the rule multiple times, but I'm now doubting myself now that I'm like, this is incorrect. This is not how it worked in an edition that I never played. Anyway, let's move on from there. Cold One Riders are, in my mind, another big miss on Games Workshop's behalf. They are so pricey. They are disgustingly pricey. So they've gone down to 4, which I did hear him say was to do with the rank bonus is 4 for heavy cavalry, so it just makes sense. And also, like, if you look at other armies, you can take, like, Boar Boys, for example, that you take units of 4+, so sure, that's fine. They've gained countercharge, which is in line with what he did with the Dark Elf ones, and he's given them Predatory Fighter, but only for the riders, so not for the unit. Predatory Fighter, sorry, not Predatory Rider, which I think you'd be fine to give it to the Cold One as well, but also I don't know that what they need is more output in terms of, like, medium strength, low AP attacks. I don't think that helps their problem, so not giving them that rule I think is completely fine. Armored Hide 3 is interesting, because then it stacks with the hold on. Armored Hide 3 shields for a 3-up save, and then they can take light armor. Yes, there we go. So you can pay to get them to the equivalent of, they've got a 3-up save default, and they become a 2-up save. Here's the problem. They're so damn pricey. Like, compare them to the Dark Elf ones. You're paying, I think it's 31 points for a Dark Elf Cold One Rider, and they are arguably better. I know they don't have the protection from stupidity that you get from, what you call it? Cold-Blooded. But you've got Lancers, which is just better. Sure, you've got 2 attacks at strength 5 AP1, but the strength 6 AP2 lance attacks are just better there. So I think at minimum you should go at the same price point as the Cold One Dark Elf models, which is 31 points or 35 with full plate. So you could keep the light armor at 4 points per model. I think that price is fine, but just drop them to 31 points there. But I also don't know that that's the solution. Maybe I would say don't give them light armor at all, leave them at 3-up save, and look at them maybe as being closer to Boar Boys than being, in the sort of realm of a Cold One Knight. I know it's a little bit weird because they are model-wise, you look like this is a dinosaur, this is a dinosaur. But I feel like, in my mind, the spot they fill is much closer to what Boar Boys do than it is, the shock cavalry that you might, or like the heavy tanky cavalry that you've got with Cold One Knights for Dark Elves. So I'm not saying drop them to 20 points, which is what a Boar Boy with Cav Spear, Shield, Big Uns, and Heavy Armor costs. I don't think that's where you want to get to. But I think you probably want to go below 31 points, but I also think I just wouldn't give them the ability to get that 2-up armor save. In my mind, they should be less armored, but then they should also be cheaper. Yeah. Anyway, I don't really know where I'd draw that line. And again, I understand that Val said that he wasn't going to talk about points or like focus too heavily on points, and that's fine. But I think, in my mind, they're closer to the Ball Boy unit, and I'd like to take, small units that hit kind of hard on the charge, but are also kind of whatever. My favorite unit of Ball Boys is full command, big uns, cav spears, heavy armor, shields, the +1 strength banner, the banner of butchery, and that comes to 195 points for 6 models, all of the upgrades, and a magic banner. I'm not taking 6 Cold One Riders because right now, especially if I'm getting them to, the giving them the light armor as well. That's what, 38 points times 6, 228 before we give them anything. There's no Totem of Wrath on there, which is probably needed if you want to really lean into making them halfway decent, because they only have AP1 attacks or AP0 on the Cold One Riders with Armor Bane. So yeah, I think they could do with being very dramatically cut in cost. Maybe I don't know, maybe 25 points. I think this is one that it's absolutely fine to wait until we see how the game changes with the FAQ, because maybe suddenly Shock Cavalry become very, very good. Again, I don't know what they changed to make that happen, but I'm not opposed to waiting to see how points shake out. I just think this needs to go down 10 points. And maybe they just lose the ability to take a 2-up armor save, and I think that's fine. And you just go, here's my sort of mid-strength, mid-output, mid-tankiness, mid unit, but it has a role in that it just kind of punches. So yeah, I think that'd be interesting. And yeah, other than that, no, I like that you don't have to pay for the cav spears, because paying for cav spears on a shock cav unit, come on, what are we doing? What are we doing? Anyway, Pterodon Riders. This is where things get a little bit spicy. These things now have better bombs. Just a weird sentence to come out of my mouth. Pterodon Riders drop rocks better. They are also, I think, a little bit tankier. They used to be, they had light armor and armor tide 1, and they couldn't take shields. But now you're paying for them to have shields, which I think you go for because you get them up to a 4-up save, and you can replace the javelins with the fire leech bowlers, which is this looks like a Cathay stat line. I think they're okay. I don't think it's necessarily a problem. Because you're paying 35 points per model for the privilege of one shot that'll hit on, what are you ignoring long range, you've got quick shots and no move and shoot penalties, so you're probably hitting on 4s, and you can march and shoot them. So you're paying 35 points to get, on average, 0.5 hits, which then becomes D3 hits, so each model gets an average of 1 hit at strength 4, AP 0, armor bane 1. I think that's just fine. But there's a lot of words on here. It's really funny that at this point in the edition, we've gone, man, ballistic skill shooting's so screwed that to make it good, you have to just ignore all of the penalties that make it bad. But yeah, I think this is fine. I'm on board with it. Previously, they were bad. It's 6-inch range, strength no, AP no, fun no, penalties yes. Anyway, so this is fine, and I would be paying the 2 points over a javelin, I think, to get there. The 4-up save, I think, is fine. They've gained Fire and Flee, which I think is just thematic and in with how this unit probably wants to play, so I think that's okay. And then they've got Skink Riders, so that you're attacking the weapon skill 3 in combat instead of weapon skill 2, which is a good change overall. I think these are fine. I don't think they're broken. I think they are still kind of just okay. I've seen people playing them before to try and hunt down things, and I think they do a similar job now, and I think they're okay. Being able to take 25 points of magic items means you can put magic resist one on them, which is just a decent spot to be in terms of if I'm ever running something like Wild Riders or something like that, something that's, fast and lightly armored, MR1 feels pretty good in terms of making it so that they don't just fall over to a Ruby Ring of Ruin, which they still will. Even though they're T3, they'll still feel pretty bad about it. So yeah, that's that. And characters on here, you can put casters on them, and I think that's fine, especially right now because you can hide them in the monsoon. If being able to hide them in the monsoon goes away because it no longer, has the incredible control, that's probably for the best. But yeah, that's something that I don't think I've seen anything that jumps out at me as super broken for a Pterodon rider specifically. So Cool. Obviously, you can put a BSP on a Pterodon. I'm pretty sure you can put them on Pterodon. Maybe you can only put them on a Razordon. Let me just double check before I confidently say that now I'm incorrect. They can be mounted. Chief can go on a Pterodon. Yeah, perfect. It can go on a Pterodon, which means you could put the -1 to hit banner in there, and you could be, give them magic resist as well, or the glittering shield, whatever. You can make a unit very resilient to shooting, and other impact, other input, and I think that's fine. I don't think there's a lot of value to do that. So Pterodon Riders, they are, I think, in my mind, like a cheap unit of them is like a B tier unit where you're like, this can do a job, and I think that's cool. I like those the units to exist. I don't think this is spammable. At 35 points per model, you could take, I guess you could take just shy of 30 of them. You could take like 29 plus characters, but I still think that's not enough. No, I think that's not enough. Someone prove me wrong. Someone play the Flying Circus list and just absolutely ruin my day, and then I'll be baying for blood, and we'll see. But I think it's fine. Ripidactyls. These ones, they got some buffs. And I don't know if they got too much, but it's again, you've buffed it 3 times or whatever, when maybe that is too many times to buff something. So, weapon skill 4 on the Ripidactyls instead of 3. I think that's probably okay. I'm not opposed to that. It does mean that if they're going into less good stuff like enemy skirmishers or wizards or whatever, they're more likely to get the kill on it, which is probably fine. And it doesn't actually make a difference into the hard to kill units, which is kind of where I'm a little bit worried about what they'll do. So I think this buff here is not too much of a problem. Going to 3 attacks is kind of a lot. Especially because they gain extra attacks from Toad Rage. So I think this might be too much. And it stacks with other buffs in like a multiplicative way. So I think the 3rd attack is probably too much there. Even though the Rider is only making a single attack at strength 4 AP 1 because the Cavalry Spear, they've been buffed to go from 2 attacks to 3 attacks, and they've got Wicked Claws, so they're strength 4 AP 2 instead of the strength 4 AP 0 that they were before, which was bad, to be clear. So I'm okay with them getting AP 2, but I think that 3rd attack is a bridge too far. And then, again, you can take the, magic resist or whatever. Armor Hide 2 plus the shield, so you're still getting a 4-up armor save on this. You're still T3 with a 4-up save. And they've got Countercharge, which for a melee-based cavalry unit, I think is okay. I'm not opposed to that, that's fine. Predatory Fighters. So they're replacing the extra attack they got on the Furious Charge with Predatory Fighters, which is the Exploding 6s, or Exploding 5s, if we get to the Troglodon. And then you've also got Toad Rage. So where Predatory Fighters and the loads of attacks comes in and is an issue is Hatred. So previously, Toad Rage, the way that it works is for each unit, you put down a Toad marker next to a unit, and any of your Ripidactyls get to, get buffs against that unit specifically. It's not tied to the unit that brought the Toad. It's like, I've got 3 units, here's 3 Toads, all 3 units dual, get the bonus against all of those units. So I think there is a world where you run 1 big unit of Ripidactyls, and then you shoehorn in a second smaller unit, so you've got 2 units to pick, and it just gives you a little bit more flexibility. And then that unit of 3 models can still go out and be kind of scary. And it's 120 points plus any upgrades, so you're probably paying like 146 if you give them MR1 on the unit champion or something like that. Whatever, it doesn't really matter too much, so it's kind of pricey to do, but you can unlock the second Toad Rage marker. Hatred is probably a problem. The reason for that is re-rolling all of your hits gives you the ability to fish for 6s. And I'm just going to, I'm just going to double check here. In fact, that's the old edition. So if we just pull up the new edition, Hatred, I think, just says all successful hits. Let me just double check here. Failed rolls to hit. Okay, so that's something at least. But if you're hitting on 4s with Hatred, obviously that 1, 2, and a 3 then goes back into the pool. You get to re-roll it, and you've got another chance to roll a 6, or again a 5 and a 6 with the Troglodon. If we like go for the go turn where you've got the Toad Rage marked unit, and you also stack on top of there something else, like you could go for an offensive banner. You could go for the Totem of Wrath. There we go. I don't know if Totem of Wrath is the way to go, but it does make them pretty punchy. Obviously, it has to go on the BSB that's joining the unit, but you're going to get The maths on this is if you're hitting on if you're hitting on 4s and you're exploding on 5s and 6s, I believe with hatred you get an average of 4.5 hits per model from 3 attacks. That's a lot of hits. That's like outside of the bounds of what I'd expect to see for a combat unit. And even if you're, without the Totem of Wrath, even if you're only Strength 4 AP2, that's still pretty decent. And if you're Strength 4 AP3 rerolling 1s to wound, that's very good as well. And remember that you have the ability to pick and choose where you're going, because you're going to march 20 inches, or sorry, you're going to march 18 inches, and then you have skirmish 360 line of sight. So you're Pegasus Knights, but worse. But also, you're kind of just doing a lot of damage into certain units. Yeah, so I think hatred might be too far, and the 3rd attack might be too far. I don't know where I stand on, maybe maybe rerolling 1s to hit and keeping the 3rd attack, maybe that's okay. But I think just being able to reroll everything and fish for those 6s or those 5s and 6s is what pushes this over into just being mathematically a bit much. So yeah, I think Ripperdactyls need a little bit of a tweak, but I don't want them to get significantly worse, because the idea of someone going, hey, I'm playing Lizardmen, here's my 5 Ripperdactyls and my BSB, and this unit costs 450 points and it's going to go and kill some stuff. Hell yeah, I'm on board with that. I just think I think it layers too much if you bring other things as well. So I just want to be a little bit careful with stacking too many buffs on this unit. Because how many buffs we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so arguably it's been buffed 5 times. You could say it's only 4 because Furious Charge has gone away. So let's say it's 4 buffs. That's a lot of buffs to put on one unit and not, I understand that you can't be iterative with this sort of process, because it's like, here's the draft. But yeah, I think it probably needs to come back at least one step there. Talked about Carnosaurs already. Let's go to my favorite monsters. So, Stegodons. I think I'm actually struggling to analyze this objectively, because I'm looking at it and I'm thinking maybe it's good, and I don't know that it is. But I don't think it's bad. But I'm like, 6 wounds and a 3-up armor save. That's kind of beefy, and you've got AP on the horns as well. Do they not just still die to cannons and Viletide and, Monkey King's Wisdom? Maybe they're good, but just, not suited for the meta that we're in. Maybe. Anyway, let's look at them at baseline. They've gone from 5 to 6 wounds, and they've gone down in points from 210 and 235, I think it was. I'll just have to double check that one. They were 215 and 230, so, yeah. Both dropped 20 points. No, 15 and 20 points there, respectively. They otherwise have stayed the same. They're still kind of slow. They're basically a chariot that's also a monster. The comparison that I would make, having played a lot of Chaos Dwarves recently, is these kind of feel like an Iron Demon. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't go down in points, but when you look at what they've got, you're like, this is, there's a lot of stuff in here. The shooting's worse, obviously, but the consistent output, D3 plus 2 stomp attacks at strength 6 from an Ancient Stegodon is arguably better than D3 plus 1 at strength 8. It's kind of by the by, but they've got that. They don't have Unbreakable, which is a big downside. They still have a lot of other stuff in here, but they've got D3 plus 1 impact hits at AP3. I don't think they need to go up in points. I think this is probably still fine, but I'm just looking at them and like, they've got a lot of the stuff that makes Iron Demons good. Not having Unbreakable is a big problem in my mind, because you kind of just want to tie stuff up forever. So I think that's a big points dip. And also there are wound less, and there are toughness less, and yada yada. So I'm not saying they need to be 270 points. But I think they're interesting, and now that you'll be hitting them on 4s instead of 2s, they're weapon skill 4 instead of 2s, although I think Howder had that previously. I think there was a fix for that in a previous thing. Anyway, it's just good that it's clarified that you're hitting against the weapon skill 4. I think, in my mind, Ancient Stegodon is just way better than the regular Stegodon. That +1 strength for the impact hits and the stomps is massive. The weapon skill, so you're getting hit back less consistently. The initiative doesn't matter at all. The -1 attack kind of sucks, but, do we care about that when most of your inputs coming from the D3 plus 2 attacks? You're losing at best half a hit, or well, you're losing realistically half a hit, and you actually might not be. Going from 4 attacks hitting on 4s to 3 attacks hitting on 3s means that you're averaging the same amount of hits. So it actually might just be a flat upgrade here. So yeah, if we look at everything just from like this point up here, and we don't even think about the stuff on top, I quite like them. I like the 3-up armor save. 3-up save, T6, and a 6-up wound. Like, I've talked about always wanting a secondary save on monsters, and I feel like they're kind of rough without them if you haven't got like a 5-up regen or something like that. But I wonder if a 3-up armor save is just enough to get you to a point where you're like, this is okay. But yeah, I like these. Obviously, as mounts, you can do some interesting stuff with them. Right now, you can put a 45-point character on the back of a Stegodon, which takes you to 240. And with the Armored Hide, that takes you to a 3-up armor save just for free. And then you can spend 30 points for a ward save or whatever. Although, I think I'd rather take Carnosaurs and just take, like, regular Stegodons outside of the character slot. So that's probably, something to think around with there. But yeah, I think they're interesting, and I feel like there is scope to do some sort of Monster Mash list, which is cool. I think in the Legacy book, you only have Monster Mash, but it's Monster Mash that kind of sucks. In the Renegades 1.5, Monster Mash takes a back seat because the slan actually works in the way that it wants to. But I think in this version, you can do Monster Mash and feel pretty okay about it. Although I think I'd still maybe want to fit a slan in because they're just decent. But I think it gives you options, which is always nice. You want to see more choice instead of less choice, right, for this sort of thing. Then we've got the weapons. You've got the giant blowpipe or a giant bow, which let's just have a look at those. So the giant blowpipe is move and shoot, multiple shots, 2d6, poison attacks. It probably should have quick shot, just because it's a... Oh, no, it's a giant blowpipe, so I don't think it should have move and shoot. Like, yeah, I don't think there's any reason why this should have the ability to march and shoot. That doesn't feel right in terms of what a Stegodon does. It's probably better just in terms of actually getting, being able to use it if you're trying to keep up with the rest of the list. You're marching 12 inches and then shooting. But I think thematically, there's no reason that giant blowpipe should have move and shoot. Same as normal blowpipes. I think replace this with quick shot, and that makes more thematic sense. Also, the giant bow is gained through and through, which is the bolt thrower rule. So you roll to hit once, and then you do a wound. You wound at strength 5, then you go through the ranks. You wound at strength 4, wound at strength 3 until you run out of ranks or you run out of strength. That's fine. I'm okay with that. It's a bolt thrower. Bolt thrower is kind of ass, so I'm not upset at seeing that. I think if you're putting that on, maybe you should give it cumbersome. Like, maybe the ability to generate like 3 or 4 combat res from a single shot might be too good, just in terms of cumbersome. Maybe it's not even too good, but just for consistency with other things like this. Like if we were to look at the Sky Cutter, the bow on the back doesn't even have through and through, but that has cumbersome. I'm like 95% sure. Yeah. So you've got multiple wounds shot here on the Sky Cutter with cumbersome, so you can't stand and shoot with it. I think it should probably just be the same here for the Stegodon. I don't really care about either of those. I'm taking the free option, which is either of them, so I guess I take the giant bow, because you're more likely to hit with it. But I don't really care, and also it might do multiple wounds, or it might do through and through. The Engine of the Gods is the interesting thing here. Obviously, I talked about this a little bit at the start. I talked about what I would envision, what my goals for casting should be in this edition. I don't think this is a positive rule for the game. And I talked about this more at the start. I understand that, obviously, Beastmen and Cathay are doing loads of spells, and Vampire Cants and yada yada. I'm hoping that to get fixed, and I don't think we should put Lizardmen in a position where they're doing that, and I think let's not make the bound spells reliant on this as well. So this is like the power level of this has gone down for the magic missile you get with it, but it's effectively the same, right? Although it's now harder to cast. I think, in my mind, the way I feel about magic missiles is if you roll a 6 on the dice, you should be able to cast the magic missile and probably just make it bound spell the power level 2. Then, you need to roll a 6 and they need to roll a 7 or higher, depending on how well you roll. But that feels like you're doing pretty okay with the magic missile without it being oppressive, but it's also going off a reasonable amount of the time. So that would be sort of my sales pitch for the change that I'd want to see for magic missiles. I also talked about how I'd like to see this buff changed. Instead of it changing, I'm not opposed to you spending, what are we talking, 245 points? And yeah, it brings its own magic missile, but I'm not opposed to you spending 245 points to make your 3 Bastillodons more consistent at casting. Maybe we don't make them cast at a higher value, but maybe we drop the value of the bound spell. So you word it so it's like friendly models that cast a bound spell within 12 inches of one or more Engines of the Gods treat the casting value of that bound spell as 1 lower than marked. Or you could even just go like, no, that's the best way of doing it. And then also Burning Alignment can just stay at 8. And then you cast it at +2, you roll a 6, and you get this kind of bad fireball that's hard to cast. Because I think it'll be easier to cast now because it's more likely to move up the board. And also you are bringing a defensive aura. But I think actually you probably won't see people casting Burning Alignment because I feel like Potent Warding is just kind of decent. A 12-inch bubble of a 6-up ward save is nice. Obviously, this is heavily influenced by the brain. Goddamn. I want to call it the Anvil of Doom. The Tomb Kings. I've said it like 4 times today. The Tomb Kings with the lighter protection. Whatever. Sorry, my brain's gone. It's obviously been heavily influenced by the Tomb Kings. 18-inch bubble of lighter protection with -1 to hit and a 6-up ward save, and this is a 12-inch bubble, which again I said earlier, I think that's good because you're going to be bringing your defensive tool with you. Obviously, you can reserve move up with the Casket of Souls. There we go. You can reserve move up with the Casket of Souls just because the rules are poorly written, but this is meant to move up, and this could, you cast this Portent of Warding, and then you can just march 12 inches, and that works, and it just feels like it's going to stay with the rest of your battle lines pretty well, and it also kind of opens up more options for you to do other things. You could argue that this should just be like you cast it every turn, but I think keeping it in line with the lighter protection maybe is okay. It's hard to say, because lighter protection might be out of range of enemy wizards because you're putting it in your back lines, but it has a longer reach, whereas this one has to be in the middle of things, so people are going to be able to dispel it. A level 3 wizard can dispel it on a 7 on the dice, which is most of the time. Maybe this should go up to 9, so you're getting it off half the time, but with the value of the Engine of the Gods, if you rework it to make the casting value 1 lower, you get it off on a 6 on the dice. Maybe that's the way to do it. And then that actually works really nicely for synergy, because you're casting it, you only need to roll a 6 to get it off on an 8, but your opponent needs to beat a 9 when they go to dispel it on subsequent turns. So maybe that's the way to do things. But I think Engine of the Gods wants to be looked at, but generally I'm kind of looking at these Stegodons, and I'm like, gonna act unwise. Gonna be out here buying, old metal Stegodons or something like that because they're just cool. Anyway, that's one of the monsters. There is another monster. In fact, there's 2 other monsters. I forgot about the Bastillodons. They went down in points. I think they were like 150. 160. Okay, they were 160 plus 15 for the Solar Engine. Oh, and now they're 140 plus 35 for the Solar Engine. Sure. All it's doing is making the Ark of Sotek more affordable. So it's a toughness 5 4-wound model with a 3-up armor save that again should probably be Armored Hide 4 just for consistency, although that's starting to feel a little bit much, so maybe you just leave it as armor value. Anyway, we'll come back to that one. And yeah, maybe I think 140 points if you want to run the Ark of Sotek is fine, but I just don't think what it does is good. So the way that it works is you can heal jungle swarms within 6 inches on a 4+, and I think that's kind of just an incredibly mediocre rule. Again, just to be clear, this is a legacy rule that I'm criticizing. Slithering Serpents has been reworked to be in the shooting phase, and it's within d6 inches, so it's probably not going off, although you can march and do it. But 2d6 strength 2 hits with poison attacks is funny because you're not rolling to hit, so the poison attack doesn't actually matter. But I think both of these are just bad rules as written by Games Workshop, and even with like the attempt to fix them, I don't think it makes any difference realistically. So yeah, I think if you want to run them because you like the model or you want to do something funny with jungle swarms, it's cool that it's cheaper here. And then we've kept it at 175 points for the Solar Engine, which is still maybe a little pricey, just like in the way that all Lizardmen stuff is a little pricey. but I'm not opposed to like making one half cheaper but keeping the good half where it is. As balanced changes go, that feels pretty reasonable. Other than that, I think this should go down to an 8+. I know it's a good magic missile. I think just make it cast on an 8. Like, I know it's a good magic missile, but it feels so bad. Or maybe don't. Maybe leave it at 9, but then you have to bring the Engine of the Gods so that it casts on an 8. I think that's what I was thinking in my head when I was thinking about this earlier. Having a spell go off 56% of the time is like kind of cheeks. And that's before magic resist and other casting. And I know I said we shouldn't balance around magic resist, but I think, yeah, Engine of the Gods making this cast on an 8, so you cast it on a 6 on the dice. It's a good magic missile, but not... I don't think I want this to be cast at +3. Like, this is a scary magic missile. If this is coming at me, I want to have the effect of magic resist to protect me, or if I haven't paid for magic resist, be able to dispel it with a normal caster and just hope that my casting is good enough. The fact that it goes off on an 8 if they've spent 245 points to get, that buff, I'm okay with. So, yeah, anyway, that's just a continuation of what I was talking about with the not Saurus, the other thing. So, yeah, that's where we're at for this one. Also, Thunderous Bludgeon, +3 strength, AP -3, multiple wounds, D3, with 3 attacks. I feel like that's maybe just a little too good. Like, I'm not to say that it is actually good, because you've got weapon skill 3 attacks. What's it do? Strength user, AP3 strikes last. Yeah, like that's an absolutely massive jump from where we are here to where we are here. Like that, I think, again, just like too many buffs. I think making it strength 5, strength +1, AP3, multiple wounds, D3, sure. Or like strength 6, maybe not multiple wounds or something else. I don't think it needs to be, yeah, I don't see a reason why it needs to be strength 7, multiple wounds, D3. That kind of feels a bit much. I don't want it to be just like you can make a single attack with it, like you see a lot of tail weapons. I'm not opposed to giving you just like, hey, make all the you've only got 3 attacks, let's make them with the tail weapon, and it's kind of like, okay, strength 5, AP3, multiple wounds, D3. That'll scare some targets without it being like, it's a war machine, right? It's a monster that's a war machine that comes with stomp attacks as well. So like, how much actual output do you want to give it? It shouldn't be able to kill dragons, but if infantry charge it and you're like, hey, I'm strength 5, so I'm wounding you on 2s or 3s, or you can threaten a character, yeah, I think that's fine. Like, I actually don't even know that it needs multiple wounds. Maybe it just needs better strength. Anyway, that's by the by. I think it's just too many buffs on here on a bit that isn't super important. Yeah. Troglodon in the like biggest, most stark change that we've seen. Movement 8 from movement 7, absolutely massive. And also 140 points down from 200 points. That's a pretty big change. That is a pretty big change. Otherwise, it keeps the same stat line. It's toughness 5, it's 5 wounds, it's got a 4-up armor save instead of a 5-up armor save. It's still got the Skin Coracle on the back. You can now buy magic items on it. You're really limited as a Lizardman player for how many defensive items you can get. There's kind of well, that's not true. You can get the Glyph Necklace for magic resist and a ward save, but I kind of don't want to waste my ward saves here. Like, unless you're doing something like 1 Carnosaur and a Slan, and then maybe you're like, oh, I'll take a Troglodon with a ward save, and that is maybe okay. But I think at 140 points, you kind of just like rip it raw if you want to run them, because they're cheap. These things are... My natural bias is to say they're terrible, because they were terrible before, but you've lost 60 points, you've gained an armor save, you've gained a movement, which is nice to have, but it's like harder to measure. That's just more like positioning and stuff. You are up to weapon skill 3 in terms of your attacks against you, and it's supposed to be in the 2 on the top. I think that's how it worked before. Again, I don't really care enough to check. You've gained predatory fighters, which is fine, because you've got the venom talons, which are AP2 attacks with poison attacks, which is not bad given that you're only strength 5. So into, harder, tougher units, even into like toughness 4, you go from winning on 3s to 2s if you roll a 6. But the big thing that they get is this Primeval Roar is actually a buff that's really worth running. So it's a command subphase rule. All friendly units within 8 inches with predatory fighters get an additional attack on a 5 or a 6 instead of just a 6. And this is where it compounds with stuff like hatred. And I don't think there's really much in there that you can do. Like, I don't think you can get dark magic. Like, I can't think of a way outside of the stupid hat, which I don't want to put on a slan, because you then become a level 1 wizard. Although I guess that's how you take a second wizard, right? You take one slan, make it a level 1 wizard with wizarding hat, and then you take the second slan that's a level 4 wizard. That's how you fit 2 of them in. I've broken the game. Anyway, I don't think you can get like hatred on tap for units. Oh, there is no. It's frenzy. It's not hatred. It's hatred Skaven on the Skaven banner. Yeah, I don't think there's many ways to get hatred. It's just the toads. So that's probably like too much when you can have exploding hits on 5s. But yeah, this just makes it interesting in a way that's worth running. I don't know if it's worth running, because I feel like this just dies still to all of the things in the meta that are very punishing, to the reason we don't see people running, you know, we don't see people running giants in like lists that win 2-day events, right? You don't see behemoth bone grinder giants winning. You don't see Ragnaroks winning. This is not calling anyone out specifically. I realized as I was talking, it sounded like it was, but you know, like you don't people see people running these like very mediocre monsters, but it's also only 140 points. So yeah, I don't know. There's a whole host of beastmen monsters that are cheap-ish that you don't see people running. Although I guess actually they're not that cheap. I think a lot of them are like 195 or something like that. You don't see people running the Praeton very often, for example, which is 160. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is enough to see it on the tabletop, because it's kind of like, it's just cheap enough that maybe you've broken that threshold, and the buff is really nice, and you've got Arcane Vassal, and you can buy magic items, and you've got a 4-up armor save. So like, there's a lot of stuff in there. I'm just not 100% sure that it's a compelling enough package, because I think there's a lot in here that you want to run that then becomes difficult to fit in. So yeah, Troglodon, an interesting one. I think what I'm going to immediately go and do after this is I'm going to go and look at what everyone else is saying about the Troglodon after, now that I've recorded this, because I feel like there's maybe some sort of like interactions here that I'm like, you know, that would make it worthwhile. So Troglodon for me is the thing that it's hard to evaluate without seeing a good number of games with, but I'm curious to see if anyone's cooking with them, so I'm going to go and have a look at that after this, I think. That takes us to the end. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully we've got some new rules coming in the next 2 weeks, which are released by Games Workshop. Maybe we'll even see them bringing all of the legacy rules to the fore. Wouldn't that be fantastic? I don't think we would, but you know, a man can dream. That would be amazing. So hope you all have a good weekend, and I'll see you in the next one.